Chapter 253. The steep cliff was rising rapidly in front of them. The weeds between the cliff crevices were dragged into a green line and then disappeared quickly. Mo Shanshan held Ning Kei's belt tightly with her left hand as the chilly wind blew against her cheeks. There was no panic in her eyes, nor did she cry out, because she believed that a person like Ning Kei would never commit suicide. With a bang, the big black umbrella opened in the air. Their bodies shook heavily, and the speed of their fall slowed down. They left the cliff with the wind and floated toward the broad-leaved forest, not far away. Her eyes squinted because of the wind. She raised her head and saw that the huge black umbrella covered the snowy sky. Even when the strong mountain wind blew, it only slightly deformed. There were no signs of it collapsing. She couldn't help but be curious. What material was this black umbrella made of? How could it be so sturdy? Ning Kei held the handle of the big black umbrella tightly with his right hand and held the calligraphy addict's waist with his left hand. He stared at the ground that was getting closer and closer and did not pay attention to the warm and smooth feeling between his fingers. He had jumped off the cliff many times with the little girl in his arms. He knew that although the black umbrella was strong, the surface area was too small and it would not feel good when they landed. When they were still several feet away from the ground, a very light and pure talisman intent was released from Mo Shanshan's fingers. The air suddenly seemed to become a little sticky, and the speed of their fall slowed down again. Ning Kei knew that Mo Shanshan had made a move, so he stopped preparing to use the talisman and held her waist tightly. With a muffled sound, he bent his knees slightly and landed heavily on the ground outside the forest. His bones and muscles instantly tightened and loosened the moment he landed, perfectly neutralizing most of the impact. The girl in his arms seemed to not notice anything at all. Ning Kei loosened his arms and nodded to her. Mo Shanshan shook her head and calmly left his arms. The ground outside the forest was covered with countless fallen leaves, which were soft when stepped on. It was unknown how many years the leaves had accumulated to such a thick layer. But the amazing thing was that there was no smell of decay. Although this forest was a broad-leaved forest, it had only just seen the light of day. The green leaves between the branches were plucked out, unable to hide the starry snowflakes that seeped through the snow cliff, making them look like stars of green. The two walked into the green forest and disappeared in a moment. They walked into the green forest and gradually moved away from the snow cliff. There were no more snowflakes from the world outside the mountain. However, the sky above the valley was still gray, contrasting with the green in the forest, making it look even colder. Ning Kei did not know whether it was because of the pressure brought by the promise of breaking the realm, or because Prince Longqing mentioned Sang Sang, who was far away in Chong, but he was very quiet after entering the forest. He was not as active as he used to be, but just walked in silence. Mo Shanshan was also very silent. She looked at his back and thought of the previous conversation on the snow cliff. She thought of the little handmaiden whom Ning Kei had protected against his own will. She thought of the bet that was not bloody, but extremely cruel. She felt sad and worried for a while. She stepped on the fallen leaves in the forest silently and did not make any sound. Looking from the top of the snow cliff, this verdant valley was not very big. But when they actually arrived, they discovered that this valley did not look very wide, but it was actually very deep. The two of them walked silently in the forest for almost half a day, but they still had not reached the end of the valley. This place was far enough from the snow cliff, so they did not need to worry about being heard or chased by Prince Longqing. Mo Shanshan looked at the big black umbrella behind Ning Kei and finally could not suppress the doubts in her heart. She asked, "Why didn't you fight before?" Ning Kei stopped and looked back at her. He asked, "Why?" Mo Shanshan looked at his eyes and said seriously, "When you taught me how to fight in the carriage, you once said that when two tigers meet, the most important thing to remember is that the brave one wins." After a moment of silence, Ning Kei replied, "In front of Longqing, I am not a tiger." Mo Shanshan glanced at the brocade bag hanging on his wrist and said, "With the divine talisman in hand, even a child can become a tiger." Ning Kei shook his head and said, Master has spent too much time and energy to write the divine talisman that can be used by people in the no-doubt state. As his disciple, I can't abuse it. Besides, you and I are both masters of talisman Taoism. We should be very clear that this kind of stimulating talisman is not made by ourselves. It is difficult for a talisman master to release the real talisman power in it. I am not sure that I can hurt Long Qing with this talisman. Mo Shanshan slightly raised her small face and looked at him seriously. She said, "And me?" Ning Ke said sincerely, "Thank you. But this is between me and Long Qing. There is no reason for you to take risks. What's more, you came here under the edict of the Divine Hall. I can't let you fall out with the Divine Hall for me." He looked at the cliff vaguely seen outside the green forest and said, "The purpose of entering the mountain is for the tones of arcane. In the end, I will still face-to-face with Prince Long Qing. He wants to force me into a desperate situation where I can't retreat. I also have the same idea. It will be good for the later things if I can get rid of him in advance." Mo Shanshan slightly frowned and said, "Prince Long Qing is not so easy to get rid of." Ning Ke said, "In the past, it was not easy to get rid of him. But now with the promise of breaking the realm, the situation is completely different. As long as I can break the realm before him, then he will be killed." He spoke slowly and calmly, as if he was talking about a matter of course. Mo Shanshan looked at him and suddenly realized that he seemed to have never thought that he would lose this bet. He also did not think that even if he won, what if the other party went back on his words? Although the divine son of West Hill was a devout believer of Haotian, if he really wanted to destroy his cultivation and leave the divine hall, the oath made in the name of Haotian might not really be binding. She asked, "What if you lose this bet?" Ning Ke simply answered, "I will not lose." Mo Shanshan did not hesitate to ask if. Ning Ke was slightly startled and said, "If I lose, then I lose. I have gone through a lot of hardships to clear the acupoints. Would I really be so stupid to fulfill the bet and become a useless person again?" Mo Shanshan could not believe her ears and asked, "Then what about the headmaster's reputation?" Ning Ke thought of Lin Ling, the Psyche master who died in the Tang camp of the palace, and laughed. "I have not seen the headmaster, but according to the senior brothers and sisters, he should not care. On the contrary, if I really choose to become a useless person after losing the bet and then leave the academy pitifully, he may be very angry at himself for taking in such a stupid student." Mo Shanshan still could not understand this sentence. Ning Ke explained, "This sentence means that the headmaster does not care about his reputation. What if Prince Long Qing loses to you and goes back on his words? If I enter the see-through realm first, he will have to fulfill the promise. It is not so easy to challenge someone in a higher state. You have entered the see-through state, but you are only at the lower level. How can you surpass 2 states and win? No matter how good you are at fighting, the gap between the states is still too big." Ning Ke looked at her and suddenly asked seriously, "If the breakthrough is suddenly disturbed by the outside world at the most critical moment, what will happen?" Mo Shanshan did not know why he was concerned about this. After thinking for a moment, she said, "It depends on what kind of outside interference it is." Ning Ke said, "The most direct and strong kind." Mo Shanshan said, "The breakthrough will suffer a severe backfire, and it is even possible that it will be impossible for him to break the realm in this life." Ning Ke nodded and said, "That would be the best." Then the two fell into silence again. Ning Ke seemed to be walking silently and aimlessly, but in fact, he had been following a certain direction. The strong and proud aura was like a bright lamp between heaven and earth, guiding him through the green forest, through a swamp, and then through a muddy, rugged, wet, and misty mountain road, and finally came to a lake. The lake was not large, with a radius of less than 1,000 feet. The lake bank was winding, and the water rippled gently. It was unknown how long this strange valley had existed, and there was no trace of artificial carving. The verdant valley was warmer than the snow-capped peak of Tianqi Mountain outside, but in fact, it was still a little cold. It was more like the winter in Chang'an City. The surface of the lake bank was covered with extremely thin ice, which automatically dispersed when the water rippled, and gradually condensed on the quieter surface in the distance. There seemed to be no artificial traces, and it was a natural lake in the valley. But Ninkei did not think so, because the strong and familiar aura came from the depths of the lake. He stood by the lake and stared at the lake for a long time. Through the clear water, he saw the white sand and round stones at the bottom, but he did not see anything unusual. Mo Shanshan couldn't sense the strong aura, but she could clearly sense the existence of other things. She walked to Ning Kei's side and looked at the fish swimming slowly in the lake. She said softly, "This lake is a big tactical array. It's strange that the lake itself is the eye of the array, which seems to violate the principles of tactical arrays." After a moment of silence, Ning Kei said, "The tactical array of the unknown place is naturally a little different from ordinary tactical arrays. You mean this lake is the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine?" She looked at the reflection of the snow-capped peak in the distance and suddenly remembered some records in the scriptures. She said in a trembling voice, "It was recorded in the scriptures that there is a lake in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Is it this lake?" Ning Kei said, "It should be right." Mo Shanshan looked at the ordinary lake in front of her and could not believe that she found the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine so easily. She said, "I really did not expect that I would have the opportunity to see the remains of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine in my life. If it were other cultivators, they would be very excited to see the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine that had been destroyed in time, and to see the legendary unknown place. They would even jump into the lake in excitement. If it were any other time, Ning Kei might also be so excited, but now he was very calm, because whether the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane was hidden at the bottom of the lake or the relics of the predecessor in the sect, it had nothing to do with him for the time being. He suddenly asked, "Does this lake have a name? Is it mentioned in the West Hill scriptures?" Mo Shanshan asked, "Why do you care about this?" Ning Kei looked at her and said with a smile, "In the future, the history books will record that Ning Kei, the 13th disciple of the second floor of the academy, broke through the see-through realm by this lake. How can this lake not have a name? Neither the nameless lake nor the unnamed lake sounds good." Mo Shanshan sighed, thinking that breaking through the realm was so difficult and mysterious. How could it be broken through so easily? His words were a little too arrogant, so she said helplessly, "The Devil's Doctrine calls themselves the Enlightenment Sect, so they call this lake Daming Lake." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.
Come to vote for me.
Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 254. The Verdant Valley seemed to be a foreign land isolated from the world. The lake water reflected the high snow-capped peak. The Tianqi mountain outside the valley was windy and snowy, and the temperature dropped day by day. But it was still relatively warm here, which was very strange. Ning Kei and Mo Shanshan did not find the existence of hot springs or geothermal heat, so they could only attribute this unusual phenomenon to the function of the tactical array. They could not help feeling shocked that a big tactical array could cover the sky and the earth against the season. They were even more certain that the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, which had not appeared for decades, was in the lake in front of them. According to Prince Longqing, it was not yet time for the mountain gate to open. The two of them did not know when it would open. Thinking that there would be a strange phenomenon, they could only wait quietly and do what they had to do at the same time. Ning Kei walked to a big stone by the lake and sat down. He looked at the strange, scaleless fish swimming in the clear lake water. After a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, "How can I break the realm?" This was a very direct question, and also a very stupid one. It was a question that all the grand cultivators in the world could not answer. Because on the long road of cultivation, passers-by saw different scenery along the way. How could there be a ready-made answer? If breaking the realm could be answered, then the headmaster of the academy must be the best person to answer this question. Didn't it mean that the senior brothers and sisters on the second floor of the academy should have broken the 5 states long ago? Ning Kei was very clear that he would inevitably encounter mountains one after another on the road of cultivation. He had long been aware of this and waited calmly. However, he had been standing outside the Dongxian gate for several months without any progress. Now, because of the bet with Prince Longqing, he suddenly had a very heavy time pressure, so he subconsciously asked. Mo Shanshan looked at him and said softly, "This kind of question can only be answered by you." Ning Ke put his hand into the slightly cold lake water and scared away a few fish. After thinking for a moment, he said, "I think the most important thing is that you must have the desire to break the realm. If you don't even think about it, the threshold will definitely be higher. Then you must have confidence. You must believe that you can break the realm." As for cultivation, his experience was somewhat unusual. Thanks to the vermilion bird black umbrella and the precious pill from the unknown place, he did not encounter any threshold at all. Inexplicably, he directly and inexplicably went from the initial enlightenment to the perception and then to the no-doubt state, and past the most difficult point of virtual and real. However, in the summer, he once entered into talisman Taoism by observing the rain, so he had some experience. Now looking at the threshold of the see-through realm, his desire to break the realm was very strong. The great pressure brought to him by Prince Longqing and time had all turned into motivation. At this moment, how could he still care about the state of mind? However, when he looked at the fish swimming freely in the distance in the clear lake water, at the fish nearby that were still a bit nervous after being scared away by him, he knew very well what he lacked the most right now. Previously, when he said to Mo Shanshan that he would not lose, and the following 2 sentences about the Daming Lake, he seemed to be full of confidence. But in fact, that was just to strengthen his confidence, not to say that he already had the confidence. Facing the West Hill Divine Sun, who had stood outside the knowing destiny threshold for many years, how could he really have the confidence? What's more, breaking the realm was too mysterious. It was like the wind and snow in the wilderness. It came without saying. Even if it was a blue sky with a scorching sun overhead, a gust of wind might cause snowflakes to fall. Even if it was not said to come, it really wouldn't. Even if the sky was full of lead clouds and the water was bitterly cold, it might still not snow for several months. Mo Shanshan walked to the stone and followed his gaze to the lake. She said, "You don't have the confidence? I always thought that I was a genius. It seemed that there was nothing I couldn't learn. Even though I later found that I didn't have the aptitude for cultivation, I still felt that I was much more vigorous than others. Do you know? Last year, I was still thinking about how to kill a powerhouse in the see-through realm with 3 knives. Ning Ke looked at her and said seriously, "Later on, it was smooth sailing on the road of cultivation, including talisman Taoism. My master and many people thought that I was a genius. However, my confidence became weaker because I saw many real geniuses in cultivation, including you." Mo Shanshan's eyelashes trembled slightly.
She didn't know what to say.
Eldest brother and second brother were the real cultivation geniuses. Chun Pippi, who was about the same age as her but had already entered the knowing destiny state, was the real genius. Compared with these geniuses, what was the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu? What was Prince Longqing? What was she? What's more, there was the unknown place. When I thought that the world wayfarers coming from there were all grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state, I felt uncomfortable all over and felt that it was too boring. Mo Shanshan raised her head and looked at him seriously. She said, "Then how can I make you more confident?" Ning Ke said seriously, "I need praise." Even if the calligraphy addict blushed even more, she really couldn't praise him in front of him. However, at this time, she finally confirmed that the guy in front of her really didn't know anything, so she chose another way. She looked at Ning Ke and sighed. "Do you know what the unknown place is in the world?" Ning Ke wiped the water on his hands on his chest and laughed. "Since it is the unknown place, how can I know?" She shook her head and said, "The unknown place consists of an abbey, a temple, a gate, and the 2nd floor. The abbey is the Jishou Abbey, the temple is the Xiankong Temple, the gate is the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, and the 2nd floor is naturally the 2nd floor of the Academy." Ning Ke stared at her face and was completely shocked and speechless. After a long time, He suppressed the chaotic emotions in his mind and shouted with a trace of embarrassment and anger, "Last time you told me that it was a mysterious place outside the secular world. Few people can see these places with their own eyes. Even those who have been there won't talk about it after coming out. That's why it is called the unknown place. But the academy is in the south of Chong and City. Everyone knows where it is, so how can it be unknown? The second floor of the academy rarely appears in the world. Of course, compared to the Jishou Abbey in the mountains and the Xiankong Temple in the wilderness, it is indeed in the secular world." Mo Shanshan looked at him and said, "There is a saying in the world that the joys and sorrows of the secular world and the outside world are never connected. If they can connect, they will be sages." She probably thought of the sigh that her teacher had once revealed and the legend of that person in the cultivation world. She looked slightly serious and continued, "If they can connect, they will be sages." Although the elder of the Lank Temple once said that the headmaster of the academy would never admit that he is a sage, the second floor of the academy is of course the land of sages. She stared into his eyes and continued, "You come from the second floor of the academy, the only land of sages in the world. Then no one is qualified to affect your confidence. Why are you not confident?" Ning Ke said in disbelief, "According to what you said, I am the legendary world wayfarer." Mo Shanshan looked at him and nodded. Then she frowned and added seriously, "Of course, the legendary world wayfarers are not as weak as you." Ning Ke, who was hurt by the simple girl again, did not refute this time because he had not completely gotten rid of the shock and shame. He thought of the arrogant words that he had said to the world wayfarer and realized that he had been scolded. He thought of the time when he and Sang Sang went to the west city of Chong and to win money from the gambling house and won it from him. He could not help but feel ashamed that he had stepped into two stinky gutters. The second floor of the academy was the unknown place, and he was a world wayfarer. It would make sense if the world wayfarers of the academy in the past were as strong and powerful as Second Brother. However, the arrogant man who carried the gavel and those mysterious senior brothers and sisters in the back of the mountain did not look like otherworldly sublime beings at all. Mo Shanshan looked at him and asked, "Do you still have confidence after knowing these things?" Ning Ke woke up and said happily, "I am the world wayfarer of the academy. I am much stronger than Prince Longqing, the divine son of West Hill, in terms of background, temperament, and style. Why don't I have the confidence to trample him to death?" Mo Shanshan did not expect that his confidence came from this. She could not help but fall silent. After a moment, she said softly, "When breaking the realm, you need not only desire and confidence, but also opportunity. When I was 14, I received a volume of scripture written by my teacher and understood the mystery of heaven and earth after reading it for half a night. I hope you can find your opportunity as soon as possible." Ning Ke thought of what Master Huangyang had taught him in the Wanyan Tower and nodded. However, opportunity was something that could only be found by chance. Just like the rain in summer, if it had fallen earlier or later, he might not have known it. Just like the lake water overflowing the willow embankment, the lake water must be full. However, if it wanted to overflow the long embankment without spreading into a flood, it needed other reasons. Ning Ke was neither a typical Tang nor a typical cultivator. He was not good at sitting and discussing Tao or understanding Tao. His cultivation, like his survival, was always full of perseverance and ruthlessness. It was the same since he was a child when he meditated hard. It was the same after he entered the academy and entered the old library. Later, he understood that life was like a problem and all kinds of infatuation. He was still used to solving problems to cultivate, but it was no longer that hard. Looking at the looming threshold of see-through at the bottom of the clear lake, he started his cultivation again. If he did not know how to break it, then he would see through it. He looked at the lake, the twilight haze, and the reflected stars in the night sky. He broke a willow branch and found a fish hook from his luggage. He hung a few pieces of dried meat given by the desolate women on it and hung it into the calm lake. It disturbed the stars and woke up the fish swimming under the lake rocks. Then he started fishing. The willow branch by the Daming Lake was extremely tough and suitable for fishing, perhaps because it had been tempered for thousands of years by the aura of heaven and earth drawn by the front gate tactical array of the Devil's Doctrine. The willow branch by the Daming Lake rose and fell. After a while, some fish swallowed the bait and were hooked. He did not pick up the rod, but just quietly held the willow branch, as if holding the most important thing in his life. The fish forcibly broke free from the hook and ran away in panic, splashing the water with a very light blood color. The willow branch had no bait or hook and was quietly hanging in the water. Ning Kai just sat on the rocks by the lake for the whole night. For him at this time, the fish in the lake were like the opportunity he needed to break the realm. Those who were willing to take the bait, and those who were unwilling, he would not force them. I caught a cold yesterday. It's not serious, but my mouth is very bitter, and I feel a little dizzy. Fortunately, tomorrow is Saturday, and I can rest. Don't rush to vote for the monthly vote. Anyway, we are all together. Let's wait for those guys to surpass us first. Then we will overtake them from behind and pass them all together. That will be fun, haha. Have a good weekend. See you the day after tomorrow. In addition, I also need praise. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 255. Emo Shanshan had been looking at the lake. She was the best talisman master of the young generation. Before Ning Kai appeared, she had been the successor of the divine talisman master. As Master Yen Sei said, the tactical array was the big talisman. The best talisman master was undoubtedly the best tactical array master. She looked at the lake and wanted to see through the magic tactical array of the Daming Lake. She stood by the lake and looked at it carefully for a whole night. Finally, she roughly guessed the origin of this verdant valley. There was a big tactical array in the depths of the clear lake. Its specific function was unknown, but it was enough to block the sight and even the perception of psyche power. There should be a more powerful tactical array above the valley, which was enough to block the influence of nature. According to her analysis, it was extremely cold this year. The cold wave between heaven and earth came from the north. The outer tactical array shrouding the valley was broken from time to time. The plants in the valley, which were locked by the big tactical array, regained their vitality. Greenery spread out, and then there was a verdant scene in front of them. This could also confirm what Prince Longqing said on the snow cliff. However, since the big tactical array in the valley was broken, greenery reappeared and the cold air from the natural world poured in. The spring in the valley had not yet fully flourished, and it would fade because of the chill. That was why the thin ice on the lake was formed. Emo Shanshan sat quietly by the lakeside. Her hands, which rested on her knees, moved slowly and silently as she calculated. No matter how she calculated, she could not figure out under what circumstances the formation in the depths of the lake would be activated. Could it be that the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine will only be reopened when the lake is completely frozen, or when a certain pivot is triggered and the lake is emptied, causing the pivot to lose its effectiveness? She frowned slightly and looked at the calm surface of the lake that was illuminated by the starry night. She couldn't make up her mind. The more she studied this formation, the more she could feel the wisdom and great power contained in it. She couldn't help but feel a strong sense of reverence for the Devil's Doctrine and the seniors who had set up this formation. As the morning light came, Emo Shanshan slowly opened her eyes and woke up from the empty state of mind. She turned around and saw Ning Kai still sitting on the stone by the lake, fishing. It was funny that his eyes were closed. Obviously, he had followed her. His head nodded up and down with the lake, as if he was fishing with his head. Perhaps feeling her gaze, Ning Kai woke up. He rubbed his eyes and his belly. Looking at the girl who was looking at him, he asked, "Hungry?" Emo Shanshan nodded gently. Looking at the reflection in the lake in front of her, she whispered, "I'll do it right away." The reflection of the two people in the lake was very clear, and they seemed to be closer. Ning Kai asked, "I'm really tired of eating jerky. Can I change my diet?" Emo Shanshan looked at the willow branch in his hand and asked curiously, "Did you catch any fish?" Ning Kai answered with a smile, "The hook was bitten away by that guy. How could I catch it?" Mo Shanshan stood up, her cotton dress fluttering in the morning breeze. She slowly stretched her right hand out of her sleeve. With a slight wave of cold talisman aura, a block of ice suddenly appeared in the middle of the lake. In the almost transparent ice block, there was an extremely fat scaleless fish. It looked as beautiful as icy amber, gently rippling with the water. Looking at this scene, Ning Kei sincerely sighed with emotion. Junior sister, you should have reached the state of perfection in the application of talisman Taoism. I don't know when I can also reach this level. Once you enter the see-through state, you will know that this method is not mysterious. Mo Shanshan said calmly, but she was thinking about something else. The talisman master, who regarded talisman Taoist master as sacred, thought, if you don't want to eat something fresh, if you don't put warm talismans on my body, if you don't know that you are at the critical moment of breaking the realm, how could I do such a thing? Ning Kei picked up the beautiful amber ice from the lake. Looking at the jade-like ice under the morning light and the fat fish which was still alive, he suddenly remembered the picture of the knowing destiny state that Chinpipi showed him in the wetland of the academy. At that time, the state of the fish in the lake was even more magical. I'm going to pick some wild vegetables and make a pot of fish soup, he said happily. Mo Shanshan shook her head and said that she would do it herself. She thought, I even used the talisman ice fish to help you break the realm. How could I care about making a pot of fish soup for you? Ning Kei tilted his head to look at the girl's busy figure and her busy life of collecting firewood. He could not help but scratch his head. He had never thought that one day the calligraphy addict would serve him. However, he had gotten used to being served by Sang Sang in recent years, so he did not find it unacceptable. It didn't take long for the fish soup to be ready. Ning Kei inserted the willow branch fishing rod into the stone crevice by the lakeside and took out some salt from his luggage. He swirled it in the pot and scooped a bowl of milky white fish soup to drink. His luggage was as heavy as a hill. In fact, it was a hill with everything in it. Mo Shanshan raised her arm and wiped the firewood ash on her beautiful round face with her sleeve. She looked at him with her bright eyes full of expectation and nervousness and asked, "How is it?" It was a great enjoyment to drink a bowl of warm fish soup after such a long time in the ice and snow. Ning Kei smiled and praised it. Then he said, "It's a pity that I didn't bring any seasoning. Otherwise, it would be better." It was a casual sentence, mainly a compliment. But it was the first time in her life that the calligraphy addict cooked alone, and there were some other meanings in it. So, she was not very happy after hearing it. She held the bowl of fish soup with her head down and gently blew the foam and steam on it. Her long eyelashes slightly blinked. After a while, she asked softly, "Is it worse than what you usually eat? It's in the wilderness. How can I make delicious food?" Ning Kei drank up the soup in the bowl and began to eat the fish. He said vaguely, "The one in my family has never made any good food in her life. It always tastes the same. I'm tired of it." Mo Shanshan keenly noticed that he said "the one in my family" instead of "the little handmaiden in my family." So she became more silent. After a while, she raised her head firmly and looked at him seriously. She said, "I'll make it better and better." After drinking the fish soup and eating the dry food, Ning Kei continued to sit on the rock by the lake and fish. The willow branch in his hand had already turned white from being soaked in the lake water. There was no hook or bait on the branch. Other than some naughty fish that would occasionally touch it, no other fish showed any interest in it. Mo Shanshan spread out the book and began to write not far from him. The light from the winter sun in the sky was warm and beautiful when it was reflected into the green valley by the snow-capped peaks around the Daming Lake. When Ning Kei was bored fishing, he would occasionally leave the big stone by the lake and come to the girl's side to watch her write. After a few comments, he would pick up the brush and write a few words himself. They could compare and appreciate each other. Both of them were calligraphers, so they could endure loneliness the most. In this uninhabited green valley, the two of them wrote, appreciated the words, and looked at the lake. Time flew slowly, and there was nothing special. Of course, most of the time, Ning Kei still sat by the lake and fished. The big array outside the green valley that went against nature had completely disappeared. The cold air of the world and the warm spring in the valley met and resisted each other. It happened to be the time when spring was at its strongest. The broad-leaved forest by the lake magically grew countless green leaves in a very short period of time, swaying in the wind pleasantly. Ning Ke held the willow branch in his hand and fell asleep unknowingly. Suddenly, he woke up with a start. He looked up and found that there was no beautiful and peaceful Daming Lake in front of him. There was no trace of Mo Shanshan beside him, only desolation. He came to the wilderness again, the wilderness that only appeared in his dream and never seen with his own eyes. Today, there were no corpses on the ground, no tragic scene of blood soaking the ground, no people looking up at the sky in fear, no indifferent butcher and drunkard, and no tall figure. There was only cold and dry air, barren and dark wilderness, and faint cawing of black crows in the distance. Ning Ke rubbed his eyes and looked toward the place where the crows were cawing, but he did not see the sky full of black wings. He only saw 3 black smokes stably floating in front of the wilderness, looking at this direction indifferently, as if they were alive. He remembered a dream he once had, the dream during his journey. In that dream, he once saw a similar scene, and someone beside him said, "It's getting dark. It's getting dark." Looking at the 3 streaks of black smoke in the distance, Ning Ke suddenly felt a chill run through his body. Frost gradually appeared on his eyelashes, and his clothes became thin and brittle. That was because he clearly saw the true appearance of the 3 streaks of black smoke. It was not smoke, but countless rays or light fragments. The black rays and black light fragments gathered together and became the darkest smoke in the world, as if it could swallow all other rays of light. Because of the fear in his heart, he subconsciously waved his hand, trying to use the willow branch in his hand to smash and disperse the 3 black smoke. But the next moment, he found that the willow branch in his hand turned into a big black umbrella. The big black umbrella opened with a swoosh and covered his body. He suddenly felt much safer. By the Daming Lake, Ning Ke was struggling on the verge of breaking the realm. On the snow cliff dozens of miles away from the Daming Lake, Prince Longqing, who had entered the realm breaking with Ning Ke at the cost of his whole life, had also stepped on the threshold of the Knowing Destiny state. With 1 foot on the threshold, it was not stable. It could move forward or backward, as if standing on the boundary between 2 worlds, or embracing Haotian's divine light, or falling into depravity. Prince Longqing had been sitting on the snow cliff for a long time. The wind and snow in Tianqi Mountain covered his right half with a thick layer of armor. The left half of his body in the world of Verdant Valley was as usual, with half of his body covered with snow and the other half fresh. This scene looked really strange. Suddenly, he stood up and calmly brushed off the snow on his body. He did not care about leaving the cliff of enlightenment. He just walked slowly to the bottom of the snow cliff and caught a snow sheep. Then he let the snow sheep go. With his back to the verdant and his face to the snow mountain, he seemed to be thinking about something. The green in the valley spread up the cliff like mountain vines, and grass gradually grew among the snow under his feet, like stars. If you want to get rid of the fence, why bother to be trapped in the fence? After a day's rest, the cold became very serious. I feel dizzy, uncomfortable, and sore. Fortunately, there is nothing wrong with my brain. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qijian.
Calm to vote for me.
Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 256. There were many typos in the chapter the day before yesterday. You can probably feel my drowsiness. I have already corrected some of it, but I haven't uploaded it yet. My current discomfort is called Cuni Mati. Standing in front of the verdant valley and looking at the desolate snow mountain, Prince Longqing was silent. He knew that he was faced with a choice again. The result of the choice was not important, but the spirit that he showed when making the choice. With the experience of climbing the mountain in the academy, he did not hesitate this time and turned to walk into the verdant valley. The moment his boots left the snow, the wind and snow on the snow cliff and the mountains behind him suddenly stopped. He looked up and saw that the thick clouds had disappeared, revealing the clear sky behind him. The dark blue and tranquil sky was an objective and real existence. However, when it was reflected in his Tao heart, the sky that appeared in his sea of consciousness had a completely different appearance. Half of it was clear black, and the other half was dazzling and resplendent like an array of stars. Once again standing between light and darkness, he shook his head with a smile after a short silence. He stepped on the snow cliff near the Verdant Valley and continued to walk. With every step he took, a few blades of grass would grow beside his boots. The grass magically became more and more luxuriant, gradually covering the entire snow cliff. The fence at the end of the snow cliff that had trapped him for many days had already fallen to the ground. On the top of one of the firewood, he could faintly see a star-like green. Although the green was weak, it was extremely pure. When he approached it, he could see clearly that it was a leaf about the size of half a fingernail, glowing with a faint green. This firewood was completely lifeless, but at this moment, a new bud had sprouted. Looking at the speed at which this new bud was growing, perhaps it wouldn't be long before it grew more green leaves, and in the end, it might even bear a beautiful flower. Prince Longqing quietly looked at the green bud on the top of the firewood. Although there was no expression on his face, his heart was already warm and extremely moved. The so-called knowing destiny was to understand the origin of the world, to master the law of the qi of heaven and earth, and even the law of life. Only such a cultivator could be regarded as a true Taoist. At this time, he was only a step away from the knowing destiny state, and there was no obstacle on the Taoist heart that could stop him. Only when the green leaves grew and the petals sprouted, he would be able to break the realm. However, the expression on his face gradually became serious because the greatest taboo was to be disturbed during the moment of breaking through. If he had crossed the threshold of knowing destiny in the Peach Mountain of West Hill, the great divine priest of judgment would have personally protected him. However, at this time, he was deep in the snow mountain of the wilderness. He had to overcome all the dangers and obstacles by himself. At this moment, the sound of clothes fluttering in the wind rang out. The Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, appeared on the snow cliff in red. Her black Taoist bun was slightly messy and her beautiful face looked a little tired. She must have consumed a lot of energy in the chase with Tang shouting. She glanced at Prince Longqing, and her clear and cold eyes revealed a trace of scorching and admiration.
But she did not do anything.
Without a word, she sat down not far from him and looked around coldly. Prince Longqing nodded to her to express his gratitude. Then he sat beside the firewood that had sprouts and slowly closed his eyes to wait for the moment when the flowers bloomed. He calmly and joyfully welcomed the arrival of the knowing destiny state. Deep in the Verdant Valley, beside the Daming Lake, Ning Ke slightly bowed his head on the stone. He seemed to have fallen asleep. The willow branch in his hand trembled from time to time in the lake as his body moved up and down. A fish swam from the depths of the lake. The movement of its tail was a little strange, mainly because its rhythm was not as light as that of its companion. It seemed to be a little tired. With the light shining into the lake, it saw the trembling willow branch. Then it swam over and carefully held it with its lips. The fish knew that it was a willow branch, and it was a willow branch that had become white and fat after being soaked in the lake. There was no meat or worms on it, but it wanted to swim over and hold it. Because the fish always felt that it should be there, and it was born to be there. Because the willow branch was so close to its confidant, as if it was a part of its body. Ning Ke opened the big black umbrella in his dream. Then he woke up and found that he was still holding the willow branch tightly in his hand. He rubbed his eyes with his left hand and found that the willow branch, which had not been touched for a long time, moved again. He could still vaguely feel the drooping feeling between his fingers. He picked up the willow branch and found that there was a fish hanging on it. The fish kept swinging its tail, splashing water everywhere. However, the strange thing was that no matter how much it struggled, the fish's lips were tightly biting on the willow branch, unwilling to let go. Ning Ke thought that the fish was really stupid. The vast North Min Mountain was the Tianqi Mountain. It covered thousands of miles and was as vast as the starry sky at night. The Verdant Valley was just an inconspicuous place in the Tianqi Mountains. There were more protruding snow-capped peaks and cliffs. Two extremely straight and steep cliffs had been facing each other in silence for thousands of years. In the middle was a terrifyingly deep and bottomless gorge. Two people were sitting on the two cliffs in silence, just like the cliffs themselves, facing each other in silence. A Taoist priest sat on the east cliff. He had calm eyes and a thin body. He wore a pale white collarless robe and carried a thin wooden sword without a sheath on his back. His black hair was still combed into a bun, with an ordinary ebony fork inserted in it. It was not as unshakable as a pine tree, but more like a cloud attached to the beautiful sky. On the west side of the cliff sat a man. His eyes were calm, and his body was strong. He was wrapped in a winter coat made of animal skin and cotton. His hands were empty, and he had no weapons. The slightly bulging muscles under his clothes seemed to contain infinite power. His bare legs were casually covered with boots that no one knew where he picked up. It was as if he could break the sky with just one step. The child-looking Tang Xiaodang stood behind the man and held the blood-red giant knife tightly. She looked warily at the Taoist priest sitting on the opposite cliff. She felt a little cold. She knew who the Taoist priest was. She also knew that the deep gorge between the two cliffs seemed insurmountable. However, whether it was her brother or the Taoist priest on the opposite cliff, they could meet at any time if they wanted to. Because they were the world wayfarers of Jishou Abbey and Devil's Doctrine. A cold wind blew in the gorge. The Taoist priest on the east cliff spoke slowly, with his clothes fluttering. He was dozens of feet away, but his voice was so clear that it seemed to be ringing in everyone's ears. I haven't seen you for 14 years. You are still like a stone, Tang. Tang said, the proud Yisu seems not so proud anymore. Yisu said calmly, you have been guarding me for 3 days and 3 nights. Are you going to guard me forever? Tang said, this is our place. Yisu shook his head and said, but the tomes of arcane are our tomes of arcane. Tang shook his head and said coldly, this tome of arcane is our tome of arcane. Yisu said, the Devil's Doctrine has already withered. The other branches have all disappeared. Your teacher has not appeared in the world for a long time. I'm afraid he has already disappeared. Only you and your sister are left. How can you resist the torrent of fate? Tang said, there are pillars in the middle. Yisu looked at him quietly and suddenly said, you don't fight because you have your reasons. Tang looked at him coldly and said, you have your reasons for not fighting. After a moment of silence, Yisu said, I've waited for 14 years for an opportunity to ask him for guidance. If I fight with you before this, it'll be too disrespectful to myself and him. Tang said coldly, you can't be reasoned with. You're not qualified to fight him. Yisu smiled and said, I have to give it a try. Are you interested? Tang shook his head and said directly, I am no match for him. Moreover, my reasons are not because of him. Yisu raised his eyebrows and asked, you have seen him? Tang nodded. Yisu said, since both of you have your reasons for not fighting, are you really going to continue watching on this cliff? Tang looked into the distance and somewhere in the vast mountains. He said, who do you think will break the realm first? Yisu followed his gaze and said calmly, I believe in the prince of Haotian Taoism. Tang said, I believe in Ning Ke because he is a disciple of the headmaster of the academy. Yisu said no more. Tang did not say anything either. The two of them were silent on their respective cliffs. The bet had been made. Ning Ke did not know whether he would break the realm or not. It was no longer just a bet between him and Prince Longqing, but a more important external factor that would indirectly affect the two powerful world wayfarers. His demeanor and behavior did not show any signs of anxiety or nervousness, as if he was not affected by the promise to break through the realm. He took the stupid fish from the lakeside and waved his hand to signal Shanshan to move aside. He took out all the seasonings and animal oil he could find from his luggage and prepared to cut the fish raw. The fish in Daming Lake were delicate, fat, and scaleless, especially their bellies, which seemed to be transparent. When he put it in the frying pan, there was a sizzling sound and a strange fragrance. Holding a branch, Ning Ke stood by the fire and looked at the color of the fish skin in the pot attentively. He frowned and looked more serious than when he was cultivating the enlightenment state. He only flipped the fish skin after a long time. Instead of using firewood, he used the talisman fire in an extremely extravagant manner, controlling the temperature extremely precisely. While carefully frying the fish, he explained to Mo Shanshan, when it comes to frying fish, the heat is the most important, and you can't flip it casually. This thing is just like governing a country and cultivation. Strategically, we can look down on it and tell ourselves that frying fish is nothing, but tactically, we must pay attention to it and be careful. The calligraphy addict was begged by him to give up 2 fire talismans. Thinking of cooking with talisman Taoism, she felt a little sad and distressed. But after listening to his explanation, she felt that it was indeed the case. The translucent belly of the fish gradually swelled in the warm oil and gradually revealed the shining hook inside. Ning Ke was stunned. It took him a long time to figure out that this fish was the first one that took the bait when he was fishing by the lake and then took away all the meat on the hook. You were obviously unwilling at that time. Why did you come back without a hook now? Looking at the yellowish and fragrant fish in the pot, he slowly raised his eyebrows and showed a smile on his face. He handed the branch in his hand to Mo Shanshan, turned around, and walked to the lakeside. Looking at the snow-capped peak reflected in the lake, the psyche power in his sense of perception moved out of his body according to his mind. However, he did not perceive the surrounding qi of heaven and earth because the psyche power had integrated with the qi of heaven and earth by the Daming Lake. He slowly closed his eyes, and his mind followed the psyche power that integrated with heaven and earth. He saw the blue stone by the lakeside, the fish in the lake, the gravel under the fallen leaves, and everything else. It was not an ordinary look, not a look through the light, and not a perception of the surroundings by controlling the qi of heaven and earth with the psyche power. It was the most subtle perception of heaven and earth. Then Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. He saw the white clouds floating in the blue sky, which were in various shapes. Some were like horse gang, some were like horses, some were like Shubi Lake, some were like trees in Min Mountain, some were like the cornice of Spring Breeze Pavilion, and some were like the old library. He stretched out his trembling fingers and gently drew in the wind by the lakeside. He murmured, "This world is full of talismans." Mo Shanshan held the branch in her hand and looked at the fish being fried in the pot. Her pretty little face was filled with nervousness. She didn't know when she would be able to move. As the smell of burning gradually spread, the translucent belly of the fish in the pot suddenly exploded. The fish hook flew out with a ding and fell into the lake water, disappearing instantly. Listening to Ning Ke's silly words, she looked at the messy fish in the pot and whispered shamefully, "The fish broke." Ning Ke turned around and looked at her seriously. "I broke it too. After designing for a long time, I finally found my own favorite design for breaking the realm. I like this chapter. The life of a foodie is always happier than that of a bitter cultivator." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.
Calm to vote for me.
Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 257. Thousands of streams converged into a river, crossing thousands of miles of valleys, hills, plains, and mudflats, and finally gushed out to the sea. It was so pleasant, just like Ning Ke's mood at the moment. He used to be a naughty boy in Chongbin City, but he suddenly encountered an accident. He was used to the ugliest things in the world and experienced the most dangerous things in the world. In his young age, he had to wander around with Sang Sang and finally became a woodcutter boy in a border town. When he knew there was Tao in the world, he didn't know where it was. He went to the market in Kaiping to find a record of the response of the Tao, but he couldn't find anything after reading it for several years. When he met a sage by chance, he realized that all his acupoints were blocked, and the so-called cultivation was just an infatuation and delusion. Fortunately, in the end, he was enlightened and entered the academy. All his complaints were gone. Today, he finally passed the important juncture of cultivation and entered the see-through state. He only felt extremely comfortable both physically and mentally. Standing by the lake with his hands on his waist, he leaned back and looked up at the clouds floating in the blue sky. He only wanted to shout or giggle a few times to express all the pleasure in his chest and abdomen. Mo Shanshan looked at him by the lake and found that his figure was so harmonious with the lake and mountains. Feeling the aura coming from the wind, she understood what he had done and showed a sincere smile. Ning Ke looked at the clouds in the sky, the clouds on the lake, and the real or imaginary snow-capped peaks in the clouds. He was moved to understand the subtle feelings brought by the see-through state. At this time, he didn't have a clear understanding of the real meaning of entering the see-through state, but at least he clearly felt that his understanding of talisman Taoism had deepened a lot. On a clear day, in a winter lake, in a verdant valley, all the traces between heaven and earth turned out to be the lines of talisman. Because of this new understanding, he had a strong desire to set up a desk by the lake, grind the ink and write down all the traces between heaven and earth in his sense of perception. But he didn't do so, because there were more important things waiting for him to deal with. On the south bank of the Daming Lake, there was a gentle slope near the cliff of the verdant valley. With the dissipation of the tactical formation and the return of spring, the gentle slope had long been occupied by green weeds and turned into a meadow. However, the outermost part of the meadow facing the cliff was invaded by the chill outside the valley, so it looked a little withered. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan stood in the frost grass and looked up at the snow cliff in the distance. Today the sky was blue and clean, and the view was excellent. However, there were countless tiny particles in the air that were invisible to the naked eye. It was impossible to see the snow cliff from a distance of more than 10 miles, and even the snow cliff could not be seen. Although Ning Ke could not see the snow cliff, it did not mean that he could not see it at all. Ning Ke had just entered the see-through realm, and it was the moment when his spirit and aura were at their peak. His senses, which were usually very sensitive, were even more acute. In his sense of perception, he could clearly see a bright ball of light. The ball of light was golden and unusually bright, and its edge scattered like a beautiful flower. He was shocked by the scene that appeared in his sea of consciousness, and subconsciously asked, "The see-through realm, is this powerful? How can it perceive the scene from such a long distance?" Mo Shanshan looked at the direction of the snow cliff more than 10 miles away and said thoughtfully, "It's not that the see-through realm can perceive the aura of heaven and earth from such a long distance, but because Prince Longqing has reached the critical moment of breaking the realm. He wants to break the knowing destiny state, so the movement is not small. At this time, he is about to take that step, and the Taoist meaning and psyche power that he has obtained for decades of cultivation are all discharged out of his body, which interferes with the qi of heaven and earth too much. That's why we can see it." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke smiled and said, "One step is not enough. In the end, I won." Mo Shanshan looked at him and asked, "What should we do next?" Ning Ke said matter-of-factly, "Of course to tell Longqing that I have already broken the realm. Since he has lost the bet, he will destroy his snow mountain and ocean of qi later. Then why should he work so hard to break the realm? If he admits defeat now, it may be less painful. If he really enters the knowing destiny state and destroys himself, I think it is too cruel." Mo Shanshan looked at him with mixed feelings, thinking that Longqing was only one step away from the knowing destiny state that cultivators dreamed of, and he would soon become a grand cultivator. At this moment, would he really fulfill the bet and abandon his cultivation and identity in the Divine Hall? "Ning Ke, you don't seem to be as innocent as you usually are. Now the problem is how to tell him that he has lost," Ning Ke said. Mo Shanshan shook her head gently and said, "When you break the realm, your Taoist heart is clear. And I can feel him. His perception is also extremely sharp. The moment you broke the realm, he should have already known." Ning Ke looked at the invisible snow cliff and asked after a moment of silence, "Then what is he waiting for?" Prince Longqing was waiting for the flowers to bloom. The green on the firewood beside him had already bloomed. There was a pink peach blossom on top of a dozen green and tender leaves. The peach blossom was blooming at a speed visible to the naked eye. One by two, the delicate petals slowly stretched out. The delicate petals slightly trembled in the wind, and a few drops of dew could be faintly seen on them. The peach blossom had already bloomed 4 petals, and the 5th one was slowly and firmly unfolding in the air. If the last petal also fully unfolded, it would be in full bloom and full bloom. That was the knowing destiny state. The fluctuation of aura from the depths of the verdant valley was clearly transmitted to the snow cliff and reflected in his sense of perception, which was the most sensitive in his life. He knew that Ning Ke had broken the realm. But so what? Prince Longqing closed his eyes and sat calmly and joyfully on the snow cliff, sitting outside the fence, sitting in front of the green leaves and pink peach, waiting for the moment when he broke the realm. Perhaps it would be the next moment. In the eyes of the grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state, the former peers in the cultivation world would become nonentities. Any obstacles that could affect their Taoist heart would no longer exist. Because once they reached the knowing destiny state, there would be a difference between the world and the outside world. Once they reached the knowing destiny state, they would no longer be a person of the world and naturally would not care about the rules and principles of the world. The Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, sat on the other side of the snow cliff. She did not look at Longqing because she knew that he would enter the knowing destiny state today. Instead, she felt a little bored and could not help but frown impatiently. It was strange that as one of the best in the younger generation of the West Hill Divine Palace, she and Prince Longqing were in charge of the judicial department. Although they did not fight openly, they had secretly competed with each other. Over the years, she had been suppressing Longqing. Now that Longqing was about to enter the knowing destiny state, she did not know why she did not care and did not feel that it was a threat. She also did not stare at the verdant valley because she had already sensed the change of the breath of heaven and earth. She knew that the academy disciple named Ning Ke had entered the see-through state. Although it was a little unexpected, she did not care. She thought that if she wanted to maintain the dignity of the divine hall, she could kill Ning Ke and the calligraphy addict later. Then who in the world would know about this bet? Looking into the distance, Ning Ke raised his eyebrows and asked, "Is he going to break his promise?" Mo Shanshan said softly, "It's impossible for him to admit defeat at this time. A loss is a loss. He has to admit it even if he doesn't want to." Ning Ke said, "I told you that day that if I enter the see-through state first, he has to keep his promise." Mo Shanshan turned to look at him, with confusion in her eyes. She did not understand how Ning Ke could force him to fulfill the promise of breaking the realm when they were more than 10 miles apart, and he was about to enter the knowing destiny state. There is only one rule in the gambling house. If you lose, you have to admit it. Ning Ke put his luggage on the ground and took out a heavy Polonia wooden box. He said, "If anyone dares to break his promise or is caught cheating, the most useful part of his body will be cut off." There were strangely shaped metal objects in the Polonia wooden box. These metal objects had a dark surface and were woven by countless extremely thin metal wires. They seemed to contain extremely tough power. Mo Shanshan frowned. She knew that Ning Ke attached great importance to his heavy luggage on the way to the wilderness. It was only today that she found out that the luggage contained these strange things, but she did not know what they were used for. Ning Ke took out the metal objects in the box and slowly rubbed his fingers on the slightly rough surface. Then he sped up his movements. With the sound of the metal components being buckled, a dark metal bow was quickly formed. Then he began to string it and took out a dark alloy arrow from the dark quiver. The shaft of the arrow was densely covered with scale-like fine lines. It was unknown how many times it had been forged to produce such an effect. If one looked carefully, one could also find some deeper lines among the scale-like fine lines. Those were talisman lines. Mo Shanshan stared at the dark iron bow and arrow in his hands. She was shocked and subconsciously raised her hand to cover her mouth. The unique primordial 13 arrows made by the unique academy in the world. It appeared in front of the world for the first time in the vast Tianqi mountain. On the day when they made the promise to break the realm, Ning Ke had asked Mo Shanshan what would happen if she was suddenly attacked by the outside world at the most critical moment of breaking the realm. At that time, Mo Shanshan had answered that the person breaking the realm would suffer a severe backfire and might even have no hope of breaking the realm in this life. So, he had decided to fulfill the promise on behalf of Prince Longqing. Standing on the white, frosted meadow, Ningke looked at the distant cliff dozens of miles away and the golden flower that was about to bloom in a sense of perception. There was no expression on his face. It was as calm as a lake in winter. The aura that Prince Longqing emitted after breaking through the knowing destiny state was too bright. It was as bright as a bonfire at night. There was no need to aim at it. It appeared clearly in front of him. If you are well, it is a sunny day. Today was a sunny day, suitable for archery. Ningke took a deep breath and raised the iron bow to aim at the distant snow cliff. He slowly pulled back his right arm. The hard iron bow was slightly deformed, and the bowstring was deeply inserted between his fingers. It is so good that the world is flat. After saying this, he loosened his fingers. The tight bowstring rubbed against his fingertips and rebounded at a high speed, driving the talisman arrow to shoot out. The sharp arrowhead instantly protruded forward from the archer's grip. When it traveled a certain distance, the diamond embedded in the archer's grip slightly rubbed against the metal arrow shaft. The diamond tip, which had an extremely complicated profile, casually drew a line on the arrow shaft like a brush tip dipped in ink on a piece of paper. It was the blank talisman on the arrow shaft. It was the last stroke of the talisman. The tail of the arrow finally left the bowstring. It was unknown whether it was because of the high speed or the activation of the talisman on the arrow, but when the tail of the arrow left the bowstring, it brought a milky white turbulence. Then the primordial 13 arrows disappeared in the milky white turbulence. Note: Prince Longqing, who was sitting cross-legged on the snow cliff, felt the fluctuation of the aura of heaven and earth from afar. He even clearly sensed Ningke's hostility and killing intent. However, he did not care and even opened his eyes contemptuously. In his sense of perception, half of the darkness had been defeated. It was as if the stars were about to occupy the entire sky. On the firewood behind him, the peach blossom had already bloomed, and the last petal was about to burst out with a final tremble. The higher one's cultivation, the harder it was to break the realm, and the more dangerous it was. However, he did not believe that Ningke had any means to interfere with him since they were so far apart. If it was not the sword of Liu Bai, the Sage of Sword, who could hurt someone from more than 10 miles away, then it could only be the legendary sage who had entered the limitless state. But did such a person really exist in the world? Moreover, he had the Tao addict Yi Hongyu to protect him. This was Prince Longqing's real thought when he was about to enter the knowing destiny state for the first time in his life. Then he immediately knew that he was wrong. Ningke, who had just broken the realm, was at the most perfect peak of his life. He did not adjust, did not wait, and did not even allow himself to be overflowing with joy. He shot his most powerful primordial 13 arrows. The power of meditation accumulated over the past 10 years, the tenacity left in his heart from all the hardships and struggles, all the knowledge of heaven and earth, as well as the hatred, unwillingness, resentment, indignation, and callousness, were all released in this arrow. It had nothing to do with revenge, but it was indeed very happy. The water of Daming Lake was rolling and shaking, and the fish were panicking. From the meadow to the snow cliff, countless fallen leaves floated down, and the treetops fled in panic, forming a hollow. The invisible arrow moved forward in this empty space. This arrow shocked the quiet lake, disturbed the dense forest, withered new peaches. Prince Longqing opened his eyes in shock and looked at the verdant valley. His face instantly became extremely pale. Prince Longqing lowered his head in astonishment and looked at the chest of the black-robed man. His eyes instantly became extremely sad. A flower bloomed on the chest that was covered by the black Taoist robe. It was not the golden flower that bloomed after he mastered the West Hill Taoism in his wonderful dream. It was a flower of blood. Behind the flower was a hole. A very empty hole. There was nothing in the hole. The moment before, The dark and slender primordial 13 arrows disappeared on Ninkei's bowstring and in the milky white turbulence of primordial qi. The next moment, the primordial 13 arrows came to Prince Longqing. This talisman arrow did not seem to need time to fly, and it could ignore the distance. The hard talisman arrow directly pierced through Prince Longqing's chest and abdomen, bringing out a very exaggerated flower of blood. It tore up the ocean of qi and mountain of snow in his body, and then continued to fly like a black lightning until it shot into the mountain far behind the snow cliff. There was a loud bang. The accumulated snow on the waist of the mountain began to collapse, gradually turning into a white torrent, and the sound was like thunder. The clear skies suddenly became gloomy, and there were black clouds in the north of the wilderness. Prince Longqing looked down at the transparent hole in his chest and abdomen, and his body slowly trembled. The arrow was too fast, so fast that he could not react at all. It was so fast that after the blood splashed, the blood in the horrible wound did not have time to ooze out, and it penetrated his body and disappeared without a trace. The peach blossom on the firewood beside him had already withered. The bright stars in his sense of perception had already been broken, and the remaining dark night had already been torn into pieces. Prince Longqing moved the corner of his mouth and smiled with difficulty. But the smile was so painful that it went deep into his bones. Thousands of streams turned into water and then converged into a river, crossing thousands of miles of valleys, hills, plains, and mudflats. Finally, the waves surged violently, and when they were about to go out to sea, they encountered a cliff that was tens of thousands of feet high, and the waves were scattered into foam.
It was so sad, just like his mood at this time.
He was originally a prince of the capital of Yen Kingdom, but he had many adventures and was used to the most prosperous and luckiest experiences in the world. In his youth, he had to travel to various countries to make judgments, and finally, he was blessed by Haotian and became the brilliant son of God in the Peach Mountain. Today, he was finally about to pass the important juncture of cultivation and enter the knowing destiny state. He only felt that his body and mind were incomparably comfortable. With his back against the green, he faced the snow peak, and the old wood beside him bore new peaches. It seemed that his life was about to be complete. However, at this moment, an arrow flew from the sky. An arrow destroyed everything he had. How could he not feel pain? Note: the 207 words here were directly used from the first volume of the Primordial 13 Arrows. No matter how I thought about it, I could not think of a better description of shooting arrows. Therefore, I used it directly. Even if I cut out the number of words in this chapter is still sufficient. I would like to report to everyone that I have put in a lot of effort into this chapter. Please read carefully. Today is the World Sleep Day, but patient I have actually been unable to sleep until now because of coughing and random thoughts. I do not know how to praise myself, but fortunately, I was awake when I was writing. There is no reason to need votes for the recent updates, but I like the quality of these two chapters very much, so there is no reason to not need votes. So if you are willing to vote for my recommendation and monthly votes, please vote for Jiangyi. Thank you very much. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for my recommendation and monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 258. Yi Hongyu floated to Prince Longqing's side. She frowned and her expression was solemn. She reached out her jade-white palm and placed it on his head. A faint and pure aura of Taoism surged from her palm and enveloped his body. The faint and pure aura gradually became thicker and shone with a golden light, just like Haotian's divine light. Then, she flicked her left sleeve and stuffed a pill into his mouth. She then crushed it with her palm and pushed it into his abdomen. With her simple and quick actions, the blood flowing out from the arrow wound on Prince Longqing's chest and abdomen magically stopped. One could even vaguely feel a strong aura of life constantly repairing something. This pill was a top-grade medicine that the Tao addict had brought out from the temple when she was young. The Taoism aura, with a strong aura of life, was a secret skill of Peach Mountain. With this method, She had pulled Prince Longqing back from the brink of death. Prince Longqing's face was extremely pale, but he would not die on the spot. However, no matter what Yi Hongyu was doing, he did not respond. He just silently lowered his head and looked at his chest. A drop of sweat fell from Yi Hongyu's temple and was instantly blown away by the snow wind under the dark clouds. In order to save Prince Longqing, she had suffered a great loss in a short period of time. She simply said, "It was too fast." If it were any other time, the proud Tao addict would never explain anything, even if the other person was the divine priest of judgment. However, she had appeared on this snow cliff today to protect Longqing, but she had failed to stop the arrow, causing Longqing to be seriously injured and on the verge of death. Therefore, she felt that it was necessary to explain. That arrow was too fast, so fast that she could not even react. Prince Longqing did not answer her. She did not know whether it was because of his heavy injury or some other reason. He looked at his chest in confusion. He knew that the injury on his body could probably be healed in a few months. However, the ocean of qi that was destroyed by the arrow, especially the Taoist heart that was damaged when he broke the realm, could never be repaired. In his sea of consciousness, the stars that filled the sky had shattered into billions of messy mirrors, and the dark night that had been twisted into cotton drifted everywhere in the space, gradually occupying all corners and his line of sight. He looked at the hole in his chest like a fool. It was as if he could see this chaotic world. In that instant, he recalled many things, as well as everything he had experienced in those times. The colorful chapters, the dazzling images, the cold and unmoving face illuminated by the firewood, the half-burnt body crying out in pain on the fire execution platform, the rotting corpses in the prison, and the proud and calm self that watched all these, all turned into countless pieces of snow and quickly flashed past the black Taoist robe in front of him. Many people died in his hands, including strong and violent men, chaste and fair virgins, charming and voluptuous women, frail and old men, and adorable children. Because of his devotion to Taoism and devotion to Haotian, he did not hesitate or waver. He happily destroyed the lives of all living beings. However, only at this moment did he realize that the feelings he felt when he destroyed another person's life were all fake. Only the pain of his own life being destroyed was real. Therefore, he saw his gloomy and hopeless future. Yi Hongyu looked at the gloomy luster on his face. She knew that his pride and his strong cultivation willpower were all destroyed by that arrow. She could not help but scold him in a low voice. "Do you want to destroy yourself?" Hearing these words, Prince Longqing suddenly laughed. His hoarse laughter was very weak. In the gradually increasing wind and snow, he seemed to be extremely painful and confused. Then he murmured softly, "I'm already useless." There was no possibility of entering the knowing destiny state. For a divine son of West Hill who was willing to dedicate his life to Haotian, living was just like a dog. He painfully turned his head with difficulty and looked at the wind and snow outside the cliff and the darkening sky in the depths of the wilderness. He said in confusion, "I was a prince. I was going to be the Yen Emperor. My feet stood on both sides of Taoism and the human world. I should have been unparalleled in the world. However, I have been destroyed. I have been abandoned by Haotian in the world of pain and darkness." In the eyes of Haotian Taoism, luck was a gift from Haotian to human beings, while misfortune was a punishment from Haotian. He had been so lucky in his life. However, today in this mountain abandoned by Haotian, he suddenly found himself ruthlessly abandoned by Haotian. No matter how strong his will and Taoist heart was, he could not bear such a huge blow. Prince Longqing slowly stood up. His severely injured and extremely weak body swayed in the wind and snow. He let out a painful howl like a beast before he managed to stand up. He ignored Yi Hongyu beside him and took a step forward. He missed a step and rolled down the snow cliff. With a dull thud, he fell down the snow cliff. His body wrapped in black lay in the snow, motionless. Yi Hongyu walked to the edge of the cliff and silently looked at the snow below. Time passed slowly, and the wind and snow between the cliffs became stronger. Prince Longqing, who was about to be buried in the snow, suddenly moved and then stood up with great difficulty. He covered his chest and stepped on the deep snow to walk out of the mountain. Sometimes he fell and got up again. He slowly walked towards the dark lead clouds in the north of the wilderness. He was better off dead than alive. He was like a fool. He did not know his fate. He was like a wounded dog without a home. Because of his violent struggle, the arrow wound on his chest that had been temporarily stopped by the aura of Taoism opened up again. Blood flowed out from between Prince Longqing's fingers and dripped onto the snow, leaving a very long red line on the snow below the cliff. The line of blood did not last long and was quickly covered by the wind and snow. His miserable figure was finally covered by the wind and snow. Yi Hongyu watched his figure disappear in the wind and snow without saying a word. She did not know when he would fall down again and be unable to get up again. He would eventually become an ice corpse in the cold wilderness. She only knew that this guy who was once qualified to threaten her was still alive, but he was already dead. After a long time, she slowly turned around and quietly looked at the verdant valley on the other side of the snow cliff. Without a trace of emotion, she said, "Some people should die, so." Her words stopped abruptly. She gazed into the distance and fell into a long silence. The wind and snow gradually brushed against her face and gradually froze her beautiful face. Her expressionless face looked like a beauty carved out of ice jade. Suddenly, she blinked. She blinked and shattered the frost on the ground. The grass that had almost occupied the entire snow cliff rapidly withered with Prince Longqing's destruction. The peach blossom on the firewood was also withering. However, as she blinked, the snow cliff changed again. The grass no longer withered or flourished. The peach blossom no longer withered or bloomed. It just stayed absolutely still at the moment when she blinked, as if time had frozen all life. Not everything was frozen. The wind and snow on the cliff did not freeze, nor did her red dress that danced with the wind. The cold wind swirled the snowflakes around her body and gradually turned into a very clear bundle of snow. It spun around her waist at high speed. The two straps of her fluttering red dress behind her were blown up by the wind and lightly touched the bundle of snow around her waist. It was like the tip of an ink brush dipping into clear water. The bundle of snow around her waist instantly turned bright red. On the two steep cliffs in the depths of the Tianqi Mountains, Yi Su, the wayfarer of the Jishou Abbey, and Tang, the wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, sat opposite each other in silence across the bottomless valley. Neither the peach blossom beside Prince Longqing nor Ning Ke breaking through the realm by cooking fish changed their expressions until the arrow passed through the entire verdant valley. This arrow is not bad. It is a good arrow. Yi Su looked into the distance and said indifferently, "Only the academy can have such a good arrow." Tang looked at him on the opposite cliff and said in a low voice, "I only know that you have lost." Tang Xiaotang clenched the blood-red giant knife and stood behind her brother. She looked at the opposite side with vigilance and slight excitement. Yi Su stood up slowly. His thin body and simple Taoist bun made him look particularly lonely in the dark gray cliff. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and looked into the distance again. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly, revealing a warm smile. Tang also felt the movement on the snow cliff and his expression changed slightly. Ning Ke slowly lowered his arm, and his hand holding the iron bow trembled slightly. This arrow had consumed too much of his psyche power, especially the damage to his shoulder muscles. However, he could not help but smile happily on his pale face. The dazzling light in his sense of perception was suddenly extinguished. Even if Prince Longqing did not die, he would not be able to break the heavy door of knowing destiny state. If what Mo Shanshan said was true, he might not even be able to enter knowing destiny state in this life. Ning Ke was not surprised that the primordial 13 arrows could exert such a terrible power in the first real battle and could destroy a powerhouse like Prince Longqing. At that time, he was only in no-doubt state in the back of the mountain of the academy, but he was in the see-through state when he shot the arrow today. At that time, Second Brother's sleeves were torn when he flicked the arrow. Today, Prince Longqing was at the critical moment of breaking the realm. How could he be stronger than second brother? Mo Shanshan stared at him, her ink-black eyes wide open and filled with confusion. Her thin and red lips were tightly pursed, as if she was filled with endless doubt and shock. Ning Ke rubbed his shoulder and looked at her with a smile. He said, "Are you shocked by my bow and arrows?" Mo Shanshan nodded gently. Ning Ke said proudly, "Isn't it awesome?" Mo Shanshan nodded again. Then she asked seriously, "You have won the bet. Why did you shoot the arrow?" Ning Ke said, "The purpose of fighting is not to win, but to make the enemy fail." Looking at the girl's puzzled expression, he continued, "If you win, but the enemy doesn't, then it is a false victory. If you don't seem to win but the enemy fails, then it is a real victory." Mo Shanshan's thoughts had been changed by him along the way. She could roughly understand his explanation of fighting, but there were still many things she could not understand, such as why he had to make Prince Longqing fall into such a terrible failure. Although you are the wayfarer of the academy and have the support of the Tang Empire, Prince Longqing is the leader of the young generation favored by the great divine priests of Peach Mountain. He is the son of God of West Hill in the eyes of the believers of Haotian. However, he was destroyed by you in such a way. Have you not considered the irremediable consequences? Ning Ke said expressionlessly, "If this is a bet, then he should pay the price of his promise after losing. If this is a battle, then I never consider other consequences before confirming the enemy's absolute failure." Mo Shanshan looked at his eyes and shook her head. She said, "This reason is not sufficient. You are a very smart person. You should be very clear that even if he entered the knowing destiny state, he would not dare to kill you. You should be more clear about the consequences if you kill him. But you still chose to shoot the arrow without any hesitation."
Why?
Ning Ke was silent for a moment, and then said with a smile, "He shouldn't have mentioned Sang Sang at that time. The most terrifying, coldest, and most shameless Ning Ke in the world was the Ning Ke who heard others mention Sang Sang. Anyone who tried to use Sang Sang to threaten or control him, he would kill them by any means necessary. Because only in this way could he be sure that this kind of threat would never be established. Only in this way could he ensure that he would not live in anxiety and pain forever. This had become his living habit or his greatest instinct. This instinct started 14 years ago. He experienced the drought and famine in the northern part of the empire, the cannibalism, the old hunter's bathtub in the wild forest of Min Mountain, and killed countless horse gangs in the grassland outside the city of Wei. This was the most untouchable point for Ning Ke and his greatest principle. There would never be any exception, whether it was Prince Longqing, the Emperor of Tang, or even the headmaster of the academy. In Chang'an, Princess Li Yu once thought that she had discovered Sang Sang was Ning Ke's weakness and Ming Men. A few days ago on the snow cliff, Prince Longqing tried to confirm that Sang Sang was Ning Ke's weakness and Ming Men according to the information from the Divine Hall. However, they were all wrong. Sang Sang was not Ning Ke's Ming Men. Sang Sang was Ning Ke's life. That was why Ning Ke, who was most afraid of death, could sacrifice his own life in order to save his own. Naturally, he did not care about the lives of others. War and peace in the world were nothing compared to him. Therefore, even if his opponent was Prince Longqing, he would choose to destroy him with one arrow. He would not care about the consequences and would be very happy. After resting on the meadow for a while, Ning Ke recovered some energy. When he was about to put the primordial 13 arrows back into the Polonia box, he suddenly raised his eyebrows and felt a slight pain in his eyes, as if he had been pricked by a needle. He looked up in shock at the snow cliff in the distance again. In the silent and peaceful world of his sea of perception, a bright ball of light suddenly bloomed. The ball of light was so cold and powerful that it was even more dazzling than the light before Prince Longqing broke through the realm. It felt very scary. Someone was breaking through the realm. Someone was breaking through the realm on the snow cliff. Someone was breaking through the knowing destiny state on the snow cliff. The person breaking through the knowing destiny state was stronger than Longqing. Ning Ke felt the aura of Hao Yan's divine flame in the ball of white light. He deduced the identity of the person breaking through the realm on the snow cliff in the shortest time, and the expression on his face suddenly became extremely shocked. Then, without any hesitation or thinking, he quickly picked up the iron bow, pulled the bow and arrow, took a deep breath, and shot another arrow in the direction of the snow cliff in the distance. The quiet lake shook violently, and the air in the forest was torn. The white turbulence of the chi of heaven and earth in front of the iron bow had not disappeared. Ning Ke quickly took out the brocade bag that Master Yen Sei gave him from his sleeve and held it tightly in his palm. He stared at the broad-leaved forest in the south of the valley and said to Mo Shanshan in a low voice, "Prepare to kill another person. Tao Addict is coming." To be honest, the sicker the book is, the better it is. Thank you, Haidang, for helping me to point out mistakes and discuss with me about chapter titles. Tut, these chapters are really well written, and the chapter titles are also good. By the way, there is a friend in the book review section who helped me to make a correction post. I would like to express my utmost gratitude. His name is Dirty Dog. See you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 259. It was very difficult for a cultivator to break the realm. Prince Longqing on the snow cliff and Ning Ke by the Daming Lake had to cultivate for years and wait for the right time to break the realm. But sometimes breaking the realm was very simple. For example, Ning Ke once comprehended the no-doubt state in one go and did not feel the hindrance between the three states at all. It was also very easy for the Taoism girl in the red dress to break the realm. The wind and snow condensed into a bundle around her waist. The grass and peach blossoms on the cliff seemed to bloom and wither. When the vitality condensed, she became a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. As everyone knew, the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, was in a higher state than Prince Longqing. Even Longqing had reached the threshold of the knowing destiny state, not to mention her. She had stepped on the threshold a long time ago, but for some reason, she did not step over it. So when Longqing was about to enter the knowing destiny state, she was not jealous or afraid, because she could enter the knowing destiny state at any time if she wanted to. A strong wave of the aura of heaven and earth erupted in the depths of the verdant valley. It was mixed with a frightening talisman intent. Yi Hongyu floated above the snow cliff with her eyes closed. Her red dress fluttered in the air around her. Her beautiful face was full of serenity, as if she did not notice the movement in the distance. However, the snow and wind around her suddenly became wild, making the red dress flutter. Almost at the same time that the strong aura in the depths of the valley soared, a bright red ribbon floating in front of her shattered into a sky full of butterflies with a hiss. That unstoppable, faintly discernible arrow trace passed through these blood butterflies, brushed past her shoulder, and flew diagonally into the distant sky. Then, it disappeared without a trace. The arrow that was shot from the depths of the verdant valley was unable to penetrate her body, but it still injured her shoulder. Bright red blood flowed down from her white and tender shoulder. When the blood butterflies that filled the sky fell on the snowy cliff, the beads of blood had already flowed to her left hand, dripping down her fingertips. Before the blood could drip onto the snow cliff, it was caught by a white hand. Yi Hongyu opened her eyes. There was no emotion in her eyes. She looked into the depths of the verdant valley and suddenly jumped off the snow cliff. Stepping on the protrusions of the cliff, she flew into the dense, broad-leaved forest with the help of the wind. Once she entered the green forest, the thin branches danced with her clothes and the tender leaves gently brushed against her face. Her body seemed to have merged with the surrounding forest leaves and air, becoming a part of nature. If one did not look with the naked eye, they would not be able to detect her presence at all. Just like that, she drifted indifferently into the depths of the valley along with the forest wind. Ning Ke's judgment was very fast. He immediately guessed that the powerhouse on the snow cliff was the Tao addict. He had already destroyed Prince Longqing. Was he going to destroy the other hope of the West Hill Divine Palace? No matter how strong-willed a person was, they would be put in a difficult position when faced with such an unexpected situation. However, his reaction was faster than his judgment. Without hesitation, he used the primordial 13 arrows again. His actions seemed to be faster than his thinking. Killing one was killing two was also killing. There was no need to be polite about this kind of thing, not to mention that he had already destroyed Prince Longqing. The Tao addict suddenly broke the realm at this time. At that moment, one could smell the great hidden danger in the blowing wind in the verdant valley. It was a pity that the second shot of the talisman arrow did not get the same effect as the first shot. At this time, his physical and mental state were not as good as when he had just broken the realm. More importantly, he did not expect that the Tao addict could break the realm so fast. She could break the realm before him when he responded so quickly and fiercely. A clear tearing pain came from his right shoulder. The psyche power fluctuation caused by the talisman in his sense of perception made him slightly dizzy. However, Ning Ke knew how hard he was and how hard his body was. He was sure that he could shoot many more times, so he was not discouraged. He still held the iron bow with the talisman arrow between his fingers and calmly aimed at the distance with no expression on his face. The ball of light on the snow cliff suddenly disappeared and blended into heaven and earth. He could vaguely see the green forest in the distance moving against the wind. The broad leaves were messy. Occasionally, a figure in a bright red dress would fly among them. Separated by such a long distance, he could only see it with his naked eyes. He could no longer determine the other's position in his sea of consciousness. How could he aim? Ning Ke's hand, which was holding the bow steadily, began to tremble. He knew that the situation was very bad, but he only allowed himself to panic for a very short moment before he quickly made a decision. He put the iron bow on his back, picked up the quiver, and turned to run down the meadow. At the same time, he shouted, "Run!" Just a moment ago, he had been calmly and fearlessly drawing his bow, but in the next moment, he was running away like a frightened rabbit. Mo Shanshan's fingers, which had been constantly tapping and calculating, suddenly froze. Looking at the back of the fellow who had already run to the bottom of the meadow, she asked in confusion, "Didn't you say that you were going to kill people here?" Ning Ke shouted anxiously without turning his head, "That woman is too cruel. We can't kill her, we can only be killed by her. Let's retreat." Sang Sang was Ning Ke's life. Sang Sang was a poor girl who had been abandoned since she was a child and survived by soaking in corpse water. She suffered from the congenital cold disease and was ordered around by Ning Ke for many years. This indirectly proved that Ning Ke's life was very hard. He had managed to avoid the disaster of bloodshed with the promise of breaking the realm. He had distanced himself from Prince Longqing with an arrow. He had thought that after this, he would have a beautiful life. He only needed to open the front gate of Devil's Doctrine, take the tomes of Arcane, pick up some treasures, and find the familiar aura before returning to the south with glory. He did not expect that a stronger enemy would come next. Entering the snow mountain in the wilderness, they would definitely meet some strong enemies, including the West Hill Divine Palace. Ning Ke had a meticulous idea and plan for these things. He took the calligraphy addict with him, carried the primordial 13 arrows, and carried the brocade bag. He was confident that he would be able to deal with any situation. However, he did not expect that Tao addict would start to break the realm before Prince Longqing could break the realm. Moreover, Shi Rue really succeeded in transforming into a terrifying grand cultivator. The waves in the front of the Yellow River were wrapping around the waves behind. Each wave was stronger than the previous one. It was so overwhelming that he could not stand it. It was like an unreasonable parent coming after he hit a child, or a gangster godfather coming after him. He bullied a tall, rich and handsome man, but his arrogant and cold sister, who inherited the great legacy of the family, came after him. His life was really too hard. Among the cliffs, Tang Xiaotang smashed the red giant knife in her hand on the ground. The little girl raised her hand and covered her mouth tightly. Looking at the source of the aura in the distance, She thought of what her brother had said. Her eyes were filled with disbelief and extreme worry. She said bitterly, "That crazy woman actually broke the knowing destiny state like this? Then I won't be able to beat her if I meet her again. How annoying." The desolate girl suddenly noticed the movement on the opposite cliff. Looking at the lonely figure in the Taoist robe, she said in surprise, "Why did he just leave like this? His sister has become a grand cultivator. Why didn't he react? Doesn't he want to help her?" Tang looked at the Taoist walking further and further away on the opposite mountain path. He looked at the Taoist's desolation and loneliness that was extremely discordant with heaven and earth. He thought of the proud and conceited young Taoist from 14 years ago. His thick eyebrows gradually furrowed, and he said, "A person who has passed the hermetic death will naturally not care about things like family." The Taoist who walked down the cliff was more powerful than before. Tang did not care. Although he did not know how the Taoist had broken through the life-death latch, he knew that people who had entered that state would often be much more indifferent to the things around them. Their Taoist heart would continue to be proud in a new way. Naturally, they would not break their promise easily. He looked at the Vern Valley in the distance. After a moment of silence, he said, "The Tao addict is really amazing. I don't know how she could resist the temptation of breaking through the realm at such a young age. She even forcibly sealed her state in the see-through state for such a long time. Is it so important for her to catch up with my brother's lonely figure?" Tang Xiaodang did not understand and asked in surprise, "Forcibly sealed her state? Why did she do that?" Sometimes cultivation is like climbing a mountain. Sometimes it is like using a ladle to fill a lake. Sometimes it is like using a stone to fill the sea. It is all about perseverance and willpower. But the last step, the last ladle, and the last stone represent the lucky chance. Tang said, "Different lucky chances lead to different gains." The Tao addict has already reached the end. She is only one step away from the peak, one ladle away from the lake, and one stone away from the sea. But she has never completed the last step. She resisted the temptation of becoming a grand cultivator of knowing destiny with great perseverance and forced herself to stay in the see-through state. She meditated and cultivated thousands of Taoist skills just to wait for the last lucky chance. Tang Xiaodang asked, "Today she suddenly broke through the knowing destiny state. Is it because the lucky chance has come?" As the saying goes, Taoism follows nature. The most wonderful thing about Haotian Taoism's lucky chance is to let nature take its course. Today, Longqing was destroyed on the snow cliff, so the Tao addict was naturally angry. If she wants to kill Ning Ke and the calligraphy addict, she needs to break through the knowing destiny state. This kind of need is nature, so she naturally broke through the knowing destiny state. Tang Xiaodang turned his head and looked at his young sister with pity. He said, "I did not expect Ye's sister to be such a woman. Her perseverance in cultivation and pursuit of power are almost crazy. No wonder she is called the Tao addict. Tang, if you can't grow up quickly, you will never be her opponent." Tang Xiaodang was considered inferior to the Tao addict Yi Hongyu, but she was not ashamed or annoyed. She stuck out her tongue cutely and said proudly, "If I go to Chongbin City and ask the headmaster of the academy to be my teacher, I don't believe I can't beat her." After a moment of silence, Tang Xiaodang nodded and said, "You are right." Tang Xiaodang suddenly thought of something. She looked into the distance and said with a frown, "Brother, if I want to ask the headmaster of the academy to be my teacher, Ning Ke will be my senior brother. Should we go and save him now?" Tang stood up and said, "Although the Tao addict is good, don't forget that Ning Ke is the world wayfarer of the academy and the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. How can he die so easily?" After saying this, he suddenly fell into silence. He raised his eyes and looked around the desolate snow-capped peak. The cold wind on the cliff peak kept blowing against his iron-like chest. He didn't see anything, but he seemed to see what he wanted to see. Tang Xiaodang asked curiously beside him, "Brother, is the Tomes of Arcane in the front gate?" Tang shook his head slowly and said, "The headmaster did not tell me." Tang Xiaodang said with emotion, I don't know when the headmaster will reappear in the world. 23-year cicada cultivation. Do we really have to wait for 23 years? After a moment of silence, Tang Tang said, 23 years is coming. At this moment, intermittent singing came from the natural mountain path between the opposite cliffs. The lonely wayfarer of the Jishou Abbey walked in the lonely world and sang a Taoist song that was difficult to understand. Flowers bloom on the Iron Arrow Cliff, sprouts on the fat fish table. The sea is full of stones, I sleep in the stable. You're on the other side. The leader is sick. I took her to the hospital at night and did a checkup. It's not a big problem. She just has a fever and the doctor did not give her an infusion. She should take the medicine first. I am still sick and really tired. Damn it, it's like how Ning Ke feels. But it's also like Tang's praise.
I can still hold on and write like this.
It's worth praising. Thank God, and you. Tomorrow is Saturday, just a day off. I wish everyone a happy weekend and good health. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 260. The treetops swayed against the wind, and the sound of leaves falling could be heard continuously. The red shadow approached the Daming Lake quickly. Neither the dense trees nor the cold wind could slow down the red shadow. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan rushed down the meadow and ran quickly to the other side of the lake. Although they were fast, they were still too slow compared with the speed of a grand cultivator who had entered the knowing destiny state. They had just run to the north bank of the Daming Lake when the figure of Tao addict Yi Hongyu had floated out of the forest and landed on the wetland of the south bank. Without any threat of dialogue or negotiation, the Tao addict looked at the two people on the other side of the lake and raised her right arm indifferently. Her index finger pointed in the air, and a very faint aura of Taoism slowly spurted out from her slender finger. The chi of heaven and earth above the slightly rippling lake suddenly fluctuated, and there seemed to be an invisible giant sword in the air, which suddenly cut down the bright lake and the mountains. After a loud noise, the green and clear lake water violently rolled, rolling the white waves and foam in fear to both sides, forming a deep gully about a few feet long, which seemed to directly see the bottom of the lake. This deep gully, which seemed to be cut by the invisible giant sword, started from the slender fingertips of the Tao addict, tore the wetland of the south bank of the Daming Lake, tore the water grass and fish in the lake, and tore the lake water which had no specific shape, and directly stabbed Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan on the north bank of the lake in a straight line. Ning Ke felt the horrible aura coming from the distance behind him. He knew that even if he really turned into a rabbit at this time, there was no way to find a suitable shelter before the attack. Therefore, he only carried out a very simple thought, or in other words, he stopped and turned to shoot the talisman arrow. The iron bow was pulled, and the bowstring was as tight as his mood at this time. However, he did not let go of the bowstring, because there was already an invisible giant sword between him and the Tao addict in red on the south bank. The chi of heaven and earth was strongly disordered in that space, which caused the violent flow of the air and even made the light refracted strangely. He could not aim at the opponent, but the sword chi had already torn the lake and the grassland on the north bank, and was about to arrive in front of them. Ning Ke let go of the bow and withdrew the arrow, and reached behind him to hold the big black umbrella. Mo Shanshan had been silently looking at the girl on the shore of the lake beside him. As the calligraphy addict, who was as famous as the Tao addict, she must have felt a little strange when she found out that the other had broken through the knowing destiny state. Perhaps it was to dispel the strange emotion in her heart, or perhaps it was for other reasons, but facing the invisible Taoist sword that broke the lake water, she did not mean to avoid it. Instead, she calmly faced it. Her jade-white right hand stretched out from her cotton sleeve and began to write in the lakeside wind. Two extremely unhealthy blushes appeared on her face. Her slender fingers that were writing in the slightly cold wind by the lake trembled slightly. As she drew a few lines with her fingertips, a powerful invisible talisman power was generated with the wind. She knew that her original state was not as good as the Tao Addict. Now that the Tao Addict had entered the knowing destiny state, she did not hesitate to use her most powerful means, the half-divine talisman. The lines in the wind trembled and shrank, and then instantly broke into countless pieces. The talisman power on her fingertips suddenly collapsed, and the surrounding space was compressed rapidly. In an instant, it became a transparent air mass. The transparent air mass condensed by the half-divine talisman of the calligraphy addict and the invisible Taoist sword from the fingertips of the Tao addict met on the north bank of the Daming Lake. Suddenly, there were countless extremely thin turbulence in the air, just like catkins. The next moment, these catkins all burst open, and the compressed and tangled Taoist power and talisman power contained in them violently erupted in all directions. The surface of the clear lake shook violently, as if it was about to jump in the air. With a deafening bang, the water of the Wanqing Lake jumped and rushed up violently. The water splashed in the green valley, and the gradually condensed winter ice at the center of the lake was blown into pieces. Ning Kei's reaction was extremely fast. At the moment when the lake water collapsed, his right hand left the handle of the black umbrella and raised the iron bow again. He shot an arrow to the other side of the lake at the fastest speed. The sky was full of splashes, thin ice, and turbulence of the qi of heaven and earth, but Yi Hongyu seemed to be able to see everything on the other side of the lake. When he just raised the iron bow in his hand, she waved her hand. The thin ice that had just collapsed in the air seemed to have received an order, and instantly densely filled the space between the two of them. In front of the iron arrow with talisman power, the ice seemed to be more fragile than thin paper. In the cracking sound, the powerful and terrifying primordial 13 arrows ignored the space and pierced all the ice before the arrowhead like lightning and appeared in front of the Tao addict. Yi Hongyu calmly looked at the man on the north bank of the lake and did not dodge at all. The talisman arrow brushed past her previously injured shoulder. The distance was very close, and even the talisman power on the arrow made the broken pieces of her red dress fly up, but it could not hurt her. With a swoosh, it shot into the dense forest, and there was a continuous roar. No one knew how many green trees were shot down by this arrow. At this moment, the lake water that was broken by her invisible Taoist sword flowed back and filled the deep gully. The scattered thin ice drifted aimlessly on the surface of the lake, looking like wild duckweeds without owners. Yi Hongyu lightly flew up with the wind and gracefully landed on a thin piece of ice in the middle of the lake. At this time, she was already a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state, but she still did not have the confidence to avoid Ning Kei's primordial 13 arrows at the distance of a lake. Therefore, she did not dodge at all, but chose to interfere with the trajectory of the primordial 13 arrows. The speed of the primordial 13 arrows was indeed very terrifying. It was impossible for a thin piece of ice to change its trajectory, but there would always be some kind of interference. What about dozens of thin pieces of ice and hundreds of thin pieces of ice? The Taoist bun of her black hair did not move in the wind, and the hair made her look delicate and bright. She stood on the thin ice on the lake and calmly looked at the other side of the lake. There was a very faint smile in her eyes, but there was not the slightest emotion in it. Mo Shanshan, who was slightly pale, looked at the girl on the thin ice on the lake without saying a word. Her right hand hanging outside her sleeve trembled slightly, and there was a slight sweetness in her throat. She thought with some confusion and unwillingness, is the knowing destiny state really so powerful? Ning Kei silently looked at the girl in red on the thin ice on the lake. He clenched his fists tightly, not to vent his unwillingness, but to relieve the tearing pain in his shoulder and to quickly stop the trembling of his right hand that was controlling the arrow. This was the first time that he saw the legendary Tao addict, and the first time that he felt the power of the legendary Tao addict. Her power was not only in the power of the state, but also in the unbelievably precise control of the Taoist law. It seemed simple to change the trajectory of the primordial 13 arrows with hundreds of thin pieces of ice, but it was actually very difficult to do it. The angle of the contact between the thin ice and the arrow cluster in the air had to be extremely precise in order to achieve the infinite superposition of different small deviations. It was fine to control a piece of thin ice, but she controlled hundreds of thin ice at the same time in such a short period of time. What kind of precise control did she need? How on earth did she do it? The aftermath of the lake was still there. With the undulation of the water surface, the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, who was standing on the thin ice, moved up and down gently. She looked at Mo Shanshan on the shore and said calmly, "The half-divine talisman is indeed a little interesting. Calligraphy addict, you have made a lot of progress and can be my opponent. If you can comprehend in the knowing destiny state and become a real divine talisman master, you may really have a chance to defeat me. Unfortunately, you still need many years to reach that step." Mo Shanshan slightly lowered her head and did not say anything. Yi Hongyu looked at Ning Ke and said with slight mockery, "You are Ning Ke? I know that you are the weakest world wayfarer in history, but I really did not expect that you would be so weak. You are a disgrace to the academy." If others laughed at Sang Sang, Ning Ke might be very angry and immediately jump up to greet the other party's ancestors. But if he was laughed at or ridiculed, he would not feel anything as long as he was not beaten to death. Holding the iron bow, he looked at the girl on the thin ice in the middle of the lake and said with a smile, "Don't say that. I also made you bleed." He did not raise the iron bow to aim at her, because the previous battle had at least proved that the primordial 13 arrows were not sure to kill a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state without a sneak attack. He never did things that he was not sure of. Now that the Tao addict seemed to want to talk, he was certainly willing to accompany her to talk. After all, according to his judgment, the Tao addict seemed to be very confident in killing him and Mo Shanshan. But since they were enemies, what he said was naturally not good. A man making a woman bleed instead of cry was often associated with the affairs of the boudoir in the tavern. Unfortunately, both the Tao addict and the calligraphy addict had lived in the Cloud Mountain all their lives and were obsessed with the cultivation of talisman books. How could they hear the wretchedness hidden in his words? So they did not respond at all, which inevitably made Ning Ke feel a little regretful. He then said, "Can I ask you something?" Yi Hongyu looked at him calmly, without any emotion in her eyes. She was like a mountain cat looking at a bamboo rat, disdainfully playing with it. She waited calmly because of the huge gap in strength. Her red lips slightly opened, and she said softly, "What is it?" Ning Ke asked, "Is Prince Longqing dead?"
No.
"Very well. Since I can't kill him, then you can't kill me either." Ning Ke looked at the Tao addict on the thin ice on the lake and said very sincerely, "I admit that I am indeed the weakest world wayfarer in history. I also admit that I am really a disgrace to the academy and the headmaster because I can't beat you. But I think it is necessary to remind you that if you kill me, the academy and the headmaster will feel even more disgraced. I am afraid that even the Divine Hall will not be able to protect you then." He once again used the academy and the headmaster of the academy as his backing. This was a very boring method, but what happened in the Palace of the Wilderness and countless stories recorded in the history books had already proved that this was the most effective method. But the next moment, he found that this method had no effect on the Tao addict. Yi Hongyu's eyes gradually brightened. She looked at him on the shore and said seriously, "Of course I know that you are the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. So it is more interesting to kill you like this." Her tone was very calm, and her eyes were very calm. However, Ning Ke felt a very terrible chill because he could hear a strong sense of madness and excitement hidden in this calmness. Yi Hongyu looked at his serious expression and could no longer suppress the excitement in her heart. She gently touched her chest and said, "I have always wanted to kill a person from the second floor of the academy, but I can't find a reason. You have destroyed Longqing today, which is equivalent to giving me a reason. I am really very happy." Ning Ke felt a little dry in his mouth. He frowned and asked, "Aren't you worried about the war between the Divine Hall and the academy?" Yi Hongyu said, "To be able to fight with the real powerhouses of the second floor of the academy has been my biggest wish since I started cultivating." Ning Ke looked at the beautiful Tao addict on the thin ice and did not know what to say. At this moment, he was finally convinced that she was really a crazy cultivation monster. He was also finally convinced that the woman who made Chinpipi feel tricky and afraid, and even made him form a certain abnormal view of men and women, was the Tao addict. Yi Hongyu looked at the two people on the shore and smiled slightly. She looked charming and pure, and said sincerely, "I am very happy to have such an opportunity. So, in order to express my gratitude to you, I had decided to kill you with my own hands. I am very tired. It is Monday. Sincerely, in order to express my anger at work, please vote for me with your recommendation votes. Thank you very much." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chijian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 261. Looking at the Tao addict's expression and hearing her words, Ning Ke could not help but be stunned. He understood that it was really the moment of life and death. After a moment of silence, he looked at Mo Shanshan beside him. Mo Shanshan also happened to look at him. Their eyes met in the lakeside wind, and they could see each other's true feelings. If the Tao addict had not entered the knowing destiny state, then even if the calligraphy addict and Ning Ke joined forces, they would not be so embarrassed, let alone be killed by the Tao addict. However, it was strange that Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan's eyes were slightly anxious, but there was still no fear in the current extremely dangerous situation. Yi Hongyu did not care about their eye contact because she was confident and crazy enough to knock them down and kill them in the deep valley of the mountains. The lake, which had just calmed down a little, began to shake violently again following her thoughts. The clear lake water was sucked up by an invisible tornado and slowly rotated around her graceful figure. The tail of the tornado left the surface of the lake and formed a transparent beam of water. Then, the surface of the transparent beam of water gradually showed dense wrinkles. The faint sunlight shone on it and formed countless light flakes that looked like silver scales. The beam of water circling around her waist was like a fish. With a flick of her slender fingers, the thin fish condensed by the lake water around her waist shot out like an arrow leaving the bow. It broke the slightly cold air above the lake and rushed to the two people on the north bank of Daming Lake with a horrible aura of heaven and earth. Mo Shanshan frowned and stared at the high-speed waterfish. She put her left hand behind her back and stretched out her right hand from her cotton sleeve. She quickly drew several lines in the air with her index finger. She did not care about the rapid consumption of her psyche power and once again used the half-divine talisman without hesitation. The talisman power in the lakeside was strong. The water beam fish condensed by the Tao addict's aura had pierced the shore. Just when it was about to touch the transparent air mass condensed by the half-divine talisman, a very bright light suddenly shot out from the depths of the transparent water beam. The light was as pure and sacred as Haotian's divine light. It was refracted by countless scales on the surface of the water fish and suddenly shone brightly. It instantly illuminated the verdant valley and Daming Lake, as if the sun and the sky had come here. The blazing light abruptly burst out, mercilessly piercing into Mo Shanshan's clear black pupils. The girl snorted lightly, her face instantly turning pale. Her ocean of consciousness was shaken, and her control over the divine talisman was weakened. Ning Ke did not expect that the thin fish-like water beam could have such a strange Taoist law effect. He only felt a light, and then a sharp pain. He could not help but groan, and almost fell to the ground. Sharp whistling sounds rang out one after another. Taking advantage of the weakness of the divine talisman, the fish-shaped beam of water, which seemed both real and illusory at the same time, kept moving forward with terrifying power. It seemed that it was about to tear the transparent mass of air apart. Concentrating her psyche into the water and using light to weaken the enemy was a very simple method, but it was extremely effective. It had to be said that the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, had a perfect grasp of Taoism and meticulous calculation in battle. The Haotians and Hao Ningmo's eyes were dazed by the Haotian, and was so K that they could not see. Fu was hit by the Quebec, and was about it. However, At this moment, a powerful talisman suddenly appeared on the shore of Daming Lake. The talisman was calm and peaceful, but it was especially powerful because of its purity. The transparent water beam that came to the lakeside instantly froze. No matter how it struggled, no matter how the complicated scales on the surface of the water beam shed off and regrew, no matter how the blazing light refracted from the depths of the water beam became even more intense, it could no longer move forward. It was as if a giant hand between heaven and earth had coldly strangled the fish. The wind on the north bank of Daming Lake suddenly stopped, and the wisps of wind instantly disappeared. The air was suppressed by the powerful talisman and dared not to have any intention of flowing. Even the debris that was falling in the wind also stopped in the air. The stillness was not absolute stillness, but a kind of stillness that one could not break free from. Half a mu of the lake was trapped in this stillness. The restless lake water struggled to flow, but it could not flow out. The thin ice on the surface of the lake struggled to break, but it did not spread in all directions. Instead, it compressed inwardly, becoming smaller and smaller. A green leaf floated to the lake from the shore and was instantly torn into pieces by the talisman. However, it was tightly tied into a bundle and did not spread. It just became a mass of green furs, which looked extremely magical. There seemed to be countless ropes between the sky and the earth by the lake. They were so wonderful that they tied up everything and restricted their movements. Because the talisman was called the Binding Fu, the brocade pouch that Ning Ke held tightly in his left hand had been broken. There was nothing in the slightly charred mouth of the pouch. The divine talisman had been activated according to his mind and began to bind everything that could be encountered on the lake. Standing on the thin ice on the lake, the Tao addict's fluffy bright red Taoist dress was compressed by the Binding Fu and clung to her body. The thin and soft dress tightly wrapped around her graceful body, which looked extraordinarily beautiful and tempting. The red laces that usually fluttered in the wind had long since fallen to the ground, dispiritedly wrapping around her legs. The bright red laces intertwined with her fair and naked legs, revealing a somewhat sinister sense of beauty. Unfortunately, the water condensed by the talisman was still shining brightly. Ning Ke could not open his eyes for the time being. Otherwise, if he saw the tight dress of the Tao addict at this time, his eyes and mind would definitely feel very comfortable. Yi Hongyu knew what she looked like at this time. Of course, she would not think that the picture of the clothes clinging to her body and revealing her curves was beautiful and tempting. She only felt very embarrassed and angry. In addition to anger and embarrassment, she was more vigilant at this time. Because at this time, she was facing a powerful, complete divine talisman. Although it was far less powerful than that of a divine talisman master, she could not ignore it. This horrible binding fu could not bind her psyche power consciousness, but it had bound her body. At this critical moment, it was Emo Shanshan who took action again. Her 5 fingers on her right hand bloomed like an orchid and instantly dispelled half of the divine talisman that was fighting with the Tao addict's virtual fish. Then her left index finger suddenly stabbed out like a sword. A strong sense of dryness appeared on the lakeside. There was no flame in the air, but there was already a higher temperature than the flame. Half an acre of the lake near the north bank suddenly boiled, and the water mist rose. After the virtual fish shone, Ning Ke had been closing his eyes, but the psyche power in his sense of perception had been acutely perceiving the surroundings. Except for the Tao addict who could not locate the position of the Tao addict who was integrated with the heaven and earth, he could clearly perceive the aura fluctuations of the rest of the heaven and earth. When the impatience just appeared, he knew that Emo Shanshan was going to use the sky-burning talisman. Therefore, when the mist on the surface of the lake was rising and the light was overflowing, he opened his eyes immediately. He drew his bow as fast as he could and shot an arrow at the Tao addict, who was looming in the mist on the other side of the lake. There was no sound, only a very thin black hole formed by the water mist on the lake's surface and the high-speed rotating fog beside the hole. The hollow talisman arrow made of mystic iron came to the Tao addict. The divine talisman bound the graceful body of the Tao addict. Logically, she had no chance to survive before the talisman arrow. However, to Ning Kei's shock, the virtual fish that was also bound by the divine talisman seemed to have sensed his thoughts before he shot the arrow. It forcibly broke its body made of water and instantly returned to the front of her. There seemed to be a faint whine in the mist on the lake's surface that was shining with a strange light. Half of the virtual fish in the lake was directly torn into pieces by the powerful primordial 13 arrows, and then turned into water drops all over the sky and fell into the lake, as if there was a rainstorm. At this time, Ning Kei finally knew that the Tao Addict's natal item turned out to be a fish. The Tao Addict's left shoulder was seriously injured again, and blood gushed out. However, because the majestic binding fu didn't flow into the lake, it turned into countless drops of blood and stuck to her bare white shoulder blade. If the virtual fish in the lake had not blocked the talisman arrow at the most critical moment, she would have been shot to death by the arrow. However, although she was alive now, she was also seriously injured. Her left arm was almost broken, and more importantly, her natal item was severely damaged and might never be able to repair. The girl's beautiful face was extremely pale. She stared coldly at the lakeside on the other side of the mist, and suddenly said with a little madness, "Uncle Yen Sei's divine talisman is really powerful, but it's a pity that you are not Uncle Yen Sei." Ning Kei ignored what she said. He took out the fourth primordial 13 arrow and put it on the tight bowstring. His fingers that controlled the bowstring trembled slightly, and blood was dripping from the corner of his mouth. The continuous shooting of talisman arrows shocked his sense of perception too much and also caused great harm to his body. But he only had one thought at this time. That was to take advantage of the opportunity of the binding fu to shoot her to death at all costs, even if he had to shoot all the 13 talisman arrows in the arrow box. But the Tao Addict would never give him any chance to shoot again. A shrill, angry, and cold shout sounded on the damning lake. The Tao Addict couldn't break the binding fu for the time being, but she didn't need to, because she was really angry at this time. Just as Ning Kei wanted to kill her at all costs, she also wanted to kill Ning Kei at all costs. The price mentioned in it even included her natal item that had been broken into 2 pieces and was seriously damaged. The virtual fish in the lake, which had forcibly broken free from the binding fu to save its owner, had been torn into 2 pieces at this time. One half of it was shot by the primordial 13 arrows, and the other half was still bouncing on the lake. As the cold shout burst out from Yi Hongyu's red lips, the half of the virtual fish in the lake suddenly calmed down, as if it was mourning at the moment before death, and then suddenly exploded. The transparent water column exploded into a rainstorm, and the dense scales on the surface of the virtual fish were stripped from the lake by some magical force and shot to the shore with the explosion of power. A piece of transparent fish scale turned into a small and sharp Taoist sword in the air. Tens of thousands of transparent fish scales turned into tens of thousands of small and sharp Taoist swords in the air. When the virtual fish in the lake turned into rain and sprinkled on the surface of the lake, the tens of thousands of Taoist swords had already sprinkled on the 2 people on the shore like a rainstorm. The momentum was majestic and irresistible, like black clouds pressing down on a city, which could destroy everything in the world. I will write more tomorrow. It is estimated that I can't finish this month's task. I apologize to everyone. But I really don't blame myself. It's not the fault of the war. I can't help being sick. I will try to write more before the end of the month to relieve my anxiety. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chijian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 262. It was said that very high places were very cold. Yi Hongyu, the Tao Addict, had a very high state. The tens of thousands of Taoist swords that she sprinkled on the lakeside like a rainstorm were also very cold. The swords condensed from the lake water were covered with a light frost and had already become ice. Tens of thousands of ice and frost swords covered the sky above the valley. A dark mass of swords arrived at the lakeside. At this moment, an umbrella flower bloomed in front of the thousands of swords. The flower was as black as the night sky, causing the thousands of swords to pale in comparison. At the critical moment of life and death, Ning Ke opened the big black umbrella. This choice was not unexpected, even like those tired of clichés. However, just like the clichés and articles were often the essence summarized by thousands of years of scholars, the big black umbrella was the same. It could bear the dust of the world and cover the sky. No matter how heavy the rainstorm was, it would not leak a trace. The small but sharp Taoist swords came densely and hit on the thick surface of the big black umbrella like a real rainstorm, making loud and dull sounds of impact. The Taoist swords could not pierce the surface of the umbrella. With the strong impact force, they broke into pieces of ice and then turned into mist and dissipated in front of the black umbrella. While holding the umbrella, Ning Ke pulled Emo Shanshan behind him. The big black umbrella was very big. The two of them half squatted under the umbrella. There seemed to be a semicircular dark night above their heads, leaving no gap. The Taoist swords could not pierce the big black umbrella, but the terrible impact accumulated on the umbrella remained on the surface of the umbrella. Then, along the umbrella handle made of an unknown material, it was transmitted to Ning Ke's hands that were tightly holding the handle. He lowered his head and frowned. His arms kept trembling, and his fingers turned pale. He had exhausted all his strength, but still could not resist the strong impact from the surface of the umbrella. Tens of thousands of Taoist swords formed a complicated sword array in the air by the lakeside. They fell in order and bombarded continuously. The speed became faster and faster. Even the ice and frost swords had a bright red tail, as if they were burning. The handle of the big black umbrella slipped from Ning Ke's fingers and hit his chest heavily. Accompanied by a painful groan, blood dripped from the corner of his mouth, but his left hand tightly gripped the middle of the umbrella handle, his right hand tightly gripping the ribs of the black umbrella like iron wire, and his chest pressed against the umbrella handle. The bombardment of the Taoist swords continued, and the power coming from the surface of the big black umbrella grew stronger and stronger. His fingers, which were clinging to the umbrella ribs, were gradually cut and bleeding, and were even about to sink into his fingers. Ning Ke stared at the white bones vaguely visible in the bloody flesh. His cheeks turned pale because of the severe pain, and even his body began to tremble. However, he still did not intend to let go. He had always been ruthless to himself, especially at critical moments of life and death. Therefore, before the 10,000 Taoist swords by the lake, he would not let go of the black umbrella, because he knew that once he let go, both he and Emo Shanshan would die. The blood flowing from his broken fingers did not drip to the ground, but flowed along the ribs of the black umbrella to the surface of the umbrella. Suddenly, a light appeared in his sense of perception. Unfortunately, at this moment, he really had no energy to find the true appearance of the light. He could only stare at the black surface of the umbrella, hoping that the psyche power of the Tao addict would quickly weaken. After shooting Prince Longqing, he was very clear that he and the Divine Hall, especially the Tao addict, had become mortal enemies. However, his eyes fell on the black umbrella, and he could not help but feel a lot of admiration and admiration. The divine talisman in the brocade bag written by Master Yen Se himself, the epic-making primordial 13 arrows that gathered the wisdom and energy of the back of the mountain of the academy, and the calligraphy addict Emo Shanshan, who had already understood half of the divine talisman. What kind of power was this? Although the Tao addict had entered the knowing destiny state on the snow cliff, if she were an ordinary grand cultivator in the initial stage of the knowing destiny state, such a power and Ning Ke's hidden dangerous means would probably kill her on the spot. In the face of Ning Ke and Emo Shanshan's hidden dangerous means, she would also die on the spot. However, the Tao addict did not die. Although she was seriously injured by the 2 talisman arrows, this crazy Tao addict did not die after all. Not only did she not die, but she indifferently stood on the thin ice of the lake. Being bound by the divine talisman of binding, she gave up the most precious natal item and used 10,000 Taoist swords to suppress Ning Ke and Emo Shanshan so that they could not fight back. Ning Ke once heard that the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace once praised the Tao addict for being proficient in all kinds of methods. Now it seemed that it was true. The Tao addict was not only in a high state, but also in her perseverance, determination, vision, and endless means in the battle. He could not help but think, even so, I can't kill you? It seems that I have to find a way to kill you. Although it was not launched by the talisman master himself, so the talisman of binding on the Daming Lake lost some of its magic, it was a divine talisman written by Master Yen Sei after all. Its talisman power lasted for a long time and was very strong. Even Yi Hongyu, the Tao addict, could not get rid of it in a short time. Her white shoulder was shot by the primordial 13 arrows again. The blood condensed into blood beads and clung to her bare upper arm. It was a little bloody. Her meticulous and solemn Taoist bun had long been messed up. When strands of black hair floated in the air, they were tied to her cheeks by the binding talisman. The black hair against her white skin made her look particularly beautiful, but also a little embarrassed. But there was no expression on the Tao addict's face. She just coldly looked at the big black umbrella by the lake. As a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, he was so weak. The academy appointed Ning Ke to represent the back mountain to travel around the world, so he must have some life-saving means. Therefore, although she sighed at the strong defensibility of the big black umbrella, she was not surprised. What really surprised her and even faintly admired Ning Ke was the ability he showed in the battle. This ability did not refer to the state or the degree of control of the breath of heaven and earth, but refer to the ingenious use of all the fighting means and the accurate choice of timing. It could even be called a kind of temperament. Today, in order to kill Ning Ke by the Daming Lake, she had tried 90% of her efforts. She rarely used the Haotian divine skill, which she had not been comprehending for a long time. Finally, she used the Taoism law of the Wanjian sect, which shocked the world by the hierarch of the Haotian Taoism sect. However, she still could not kill him. Instead, she was seriously injured by him. The miserable wound on her shoulder, the slightly warm blood in her palm, and the blood beads on her upper arm all made Yi Hongyu feel angry, humiliated, and even crazy. But her eyes began to burn like the swords formed by the frozen water scales, revealing a fanatical coldness. Only when facing an opponent who is truly worthy of respect would such a look appear. In order to prove her Tao, she searched for powerhouses on the Peach Mountain of West Hill and searched for the descendants in the wilderness of the world. Over the years, she had fought with many powerhouses, but very few of them could win her respect and even admiration. Because in her view, those so-called powerhouses only had the state and powerful strength, but did not know how to use them. They were as worthless as pedantic scholars. Until today, she met Ning Ke and found that the weakest world wayfarer in history was an extremely rare cultivator who understood the true meaning of fighting. Although his state was still low, as long as his state improved a little, he would definitely be extremely powerful when proving his Tao by life and death. She was very sure of this inference, because she was such a person. The big black umbrella trembled under the Taoist swords of the rainstorm by the lake. It seemed that it would collapse at any time, but it did not. The water mist that the ice swords turned into became thicker and thicker, and gradually buried it. The Tao addict looked at it expressionlessly and said very seriously in her heart, "Even this can't kill you? It seems that you really have to die." Yi Hongyu was obsessed with Tao and with proving her Tao. How to prove her Tao? Only life and death, so she fanatically pursued fighting. Ning Ke was obsessed with life and death. Why did he want to die?
He could only avoid death.
So he fought desperately. Although the reasons were different, the apparent temperament formed was somewhat similar. If they could know each other's childhood, they would probably know that they were the same kind of people. Because they had the same temperament and philosophy, they admired each other and had a deeper desire to kill each other. Because it was not easy to kill, they respected each other and had to kill each other. The Taoist swords attacked the black umbrella, and the black umbrella resisted the Taoist swords. Standing on the lake, the Tao addict could not move her body, and the wound on her shoulder was still bleeding. She did not know when her psyche power would be exhausted. Hiding under the umbrella, Ning Ke could not move his body, and the wound between his fingers kept bleeding. He did not know when he could not hold the umbrella tightly. As time passed, Yi Hongyu's face was pale, but there was no sign that her psyche power was exhausted. Ning Ke lowered his head and tightly pursed his lips that were pale because of the loss of blood, and there was no sign that he would let go. The battle by the Daming Lake changed from a very intense dynamic picture to an absolute static picture. Except for the sword and the umbrella, the hidden danger was getting more and more intense. As long as one side could not hold on, it would be the time of destruction. The situation seemed to have entered a deadlock. Both of them were so fierce that they could not see the end of this deadlock. It seemed that survival or death could only depend on who could hold on to the end. In this case, a female talisman master seemed to be forgotten. But she was the calligraphy addict, so how could she be forgotten? In fact, the person who finally solved this deadlock was her. Mo Shanshan stood up and stood outside the big black umbrella. Ning Ke was astonished. Looking at the dense Taoist swords coming toward her, the female talisman master calmly bit her finger and let the blood drip from her finger. Then she gently stretched out her finger in the air. With her movement, the Taoist sword stabbing toward her suddenly slowed down a little. The blood dripping from her slender fingertip was strangely suspended in the air. Then, Mo Shanshan's fingertip gently dipped into the beads of blood in the air, like a slender purple brush dipping into the ink of a Huangzhou clay inkstone. She gently dragged the invisible paper in the air and drew a line of blood. It was still the half-divine talisman, but this time the talisman line was not invisible, but followed the blood line and was extremely clear. The talisman intent gradually emerging by the lake was not stronger than before, but it was more vivid, as if it was alive. The most powerful half-divine talisman that the calligraphy addict had written in her life did not go to the Tao addict standing on the lake because the distance was too far, and she knew that even if she took action, she might not be able to knock down the powerful woman. Her half-divine talisman was thrown to the Daming Lake. It was like a dry brush that had just finished writing a dripping ink scroll, throwing it into the clear water in the urn, trying to wash itself. In the clear water of the Daming Lake, there were suddenly countless extremely thin blood lines, like cinnabar. With this stroke as the guide, a distant and ancient aura was born from the bottom of the lake, making people feel shocked and worship. The Daming Lake came to life. The lake water was steaming and rolling, and the mist covered the valley. The Daming Lake disappeared without a trace. The lake water lost the sound of waves, and the mist covered everything. That ancient and distant aura gathered in the thick mist and suddenly surged. In an instant, it occupied the entire verdant valley. In the blink of an eye, it overflowed the towering snow-capped peak and finally rushed into the distant gray sky. It seemed that the sky was about to be opened. Motherf ****, I wrote it out in a clean and refreshing manner. Who's more ruthless than me? To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote for it and vote monthly. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 263. The ancient aura surged up from the mountain and pierced the gray sky. But it suddenly converged at the moment when it was about to touch the sky. The floating snow on the top of the snow-capped peak flew gradually, and the aura of the verdant valley was in chaos. The strong wind danced wildly in the air and swept everything in a flash. The Tao addict's thousands of ice swords, the calligraphy addict's half-divine talisman, the binding talisman released by Ning Ke crushed the bag, and the boiling lake water were all swallowed up by the wind and disappeared without a trace. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan were directly shaken by the soaring aura. They woke up after a moment of dizziness. Looking at the thick fog covering the sky and the earth, he could not help but feel a little cold. This kind of horrible aura was not like the power that a human could exert. Even a powerhouse at the peak of knowing destiny state could not do this. The quiver and the bag were still beside him. He was shocked and puzzled. This violent aura directly swallowed everything, including the aura of the Tao addict. But why was he still intact and not hurt? What is this talisman? Ning Ke could not suppress the shock in his heart and looked at Emo Shanshan beside him and asked. Emo Shanshan raised her sleeves to wipe the blood dripping from the corner of her mouth and shook her head. Previously, she used her blood as ink to write the half-divine talisman to attack the Daming Lake, which caused the change in the valley. However, it seemed that she did not expect such a result. Listening to the silent surroundings, she found that she could no longer hear the waves of the Daming Lake. There was some lingering fear in her dark eyes. She trembled and said, "It has nothing to do with me." The two supported each other and stood up with difficulty. Their sight was full of mist, and they could not see clearly where they were. Ning Ke did not understand her words and looked at her with an inquiring look. Emo Shanshan coughed slightly and felt the ancient aura still lingering in the thick fog. She said with awe and longing, "This aura is the power released when the front gate array of the Devil's Doctrine is opened. I just tried to open the array, but I did not expect that the power released by opening the array would be so strong." The front gate array of the Devil's Doctrine was opened? Ning Ke was shocked. A few days ago on the snow cliff, Prince Longqing had said that it would take some time before the front gate of Devil's Doctrine would open. These days, he had been comprehending Tao by the Daming Lake, but he did not feel any signs of the front gate of Devil's Doctrine opening. He did not expect that Emo Shanshan had the ability to see through the big tactical formation of the front gate of Devil's Doctrine and make it open in advance. Thinking of this, he looked at Emo Shanshan with a burning gaze. He thought that the three addicts in the world were indeed worthy of their reputation. Usually, they looked gentle, and there was nothing special about them. However, at the critical moment, they could always bring too many surprises. The calligraphy addict had really reached the realm of the talisman tactical circle. Being stared at by Ning Ke's scorching eyes, Emo Shanshan was not used to the admiration in his eyes. She lowered her head shyly and explained softly, "You have been comprehending Tao and breaking the realm by the lakeside these days, and I have nothing to do. So I have been looking at this front gate tactical array for a long time by the lakeside, so I have understood some things." She lowered her head and continued to whisper, "And this is not the main tactical array, but the hidden tactical array outside the front gate." Although Master Yen Sei had once said that talismans were tactical arrays, and Ning Ke had also been used as a coolie by Seven Sister to repair the back mountain tactical array of the academy, his knowledge of tactical arrays was still extremely poor, and he did not understand the hidden tactical array at all. However, he was very clear that the situation had fallen into a desperate situation under the attack of the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu. Emo Shanshan opening the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was equivalent to directly breaking the deadlock, which was more important than anything else. Ning Ke sighed with emotion and said, "The Tao addict is really powerful. After entering the knowing destiny state, even you and I together are no match for her. It's a pity that you are here, so the Daming Lake is a wrong battlefield for her." Emo Shanshan raised her head with joy in her eyes. From the frontier fortress of the north of Yen Kingdom to the depths of the wilderness, she always felt that compared with Ning Ke, she was only a calligraphy addict, but did not play much role. She could not help but feel a little sad. At this time, after receiving Ning Ke's praise, she confirmed that she had played a role, so she said softly, "I was just trying." Ning Ke said with a smile, "Excessive modesty is arrogance." Emo Shanshan nodded with a smile. Looking at the thick fog around them, Ning Ke slightly frowned and asked, "What should we do next? If the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine has been opened, how can we get in?" The fog was so thick that it blocked all vision. The chi of heaven and earth was so chaotic that even the sense of perception could only perceive a very chaotic area. In such an environment, he did not even know where he was at this time, let alone find the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Was he still in the Verdant Valley, or had he been shaken to other places by that aura? Emo Shanshan closed her eyes and stretched her slender fingers out of her cotton sleeves into the fog. She slightly bent her fingers to calculate and perceive. After a moment, she opened her eyes and frowned, saying, "Let's wait for the fog to disperse." There was always time for the fog to disperse. It did not take long before the change in the chi of heaven and earth caused by the opening of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was gradually diluted by the real world. The fog in the air was the first to disperse, and they could vaguely see the high sky. For some reason, the originally gray snow clouds had already dispersed, revealing a corner of the blue sky. The fog dispersed faster and faster. From the blue sky to the snow-capped peak, and then to the peak, Ning Ke continuously saw the lush greenery from the blue sky to the snow-capped peak. Looking at the snow-capped peak that he had seen for a few days and the relative position, he was shocked to find that the place where he and Sang Sang were standing at should be the center of the Daming Lake. However, the soles of their feet were clearly touching the ground. How could they be in the lake? Where did the water of the Daming Lake go? If the lake water was directly evaporated by the power of the opening of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, there should be mud under their feet. However, the hard and thick feeling was obviously a little strange. The fog continued to disperse from the sky to the land, and they could already see the green broad-leaved forest by the lake. Looking at the height of the forest, Ning Ke was more and more sure that they were at the bottom of the lake with a lower terrain, and he became more and more confused. However, at this time, he had no time to think about the answer of the mysterious disappearance of the Daming Lake. Seeing that the fog gradually dispersed and the green forest gradually appeared, he pulled the bow and arrow again as fast as he could. He endured the sharp pain in his shoulder and ignored the blood still flowing between his fingers. He vigilantly searched the surrounding scene with his eyes and psyche power. His vision became clear again, and the frenzied chi of heaven and earth fluctuated calmly. It meant that the things that protected him like a trench previously did not exist. The Tao addict could find him at any time and launch another attack. The front gate of the Devil's Doctrine had been opened, but neither he nor Mo Shanshan were seriously injured because of it. Naturally, he did not believe that the powerful and crazy Tao addict would suffer any serious damage. The sharp and cold arrowhead of the talisman arrow moved steadily and slowly, aiming at all directions in the clear vision. It was ready to leave the tight string and shoot at the red dress that suddenly appeared. However, when the fog dissipated, he still did not find Yi Hongyu's figure, no matter with his eyes or psyche power. He did not even hear the slightest noise. The whole green valley became extremely quiet. It was not absolute silence. There was the sound of spring water and gurgling water, which sounded intermittently around the surroundings. Ning Ke did not know where the Tao addict had gone, but his intuition told him that it should be temporarily safe. He slowly pulled back the bow and looked at Mo Shanshan beside him. He took a few steps around, and the soles of his boots stepped on the gravel, making a rustling sound. At this time, they were indeed at the original bottom of the Daming Lake, but they were not stepping on black mud or silver-fine sand, but dense stones full of edges. A few days ago, when he was comprehending Tao and breaking the realm by the Daming Lake, he found that the quiet lake was not very large. However, walking at the bottom of the dry lake today, he found that it was actually very large, like a giant hollowed-out stone bowl. It was a quiet lake in winter a moment ago, and the next moment it became a dry gravel ground. This was really an incredible and magical scene. However, thinking that the Devil's Doctrine's front gate was an unknown place, Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan did not show too much emotion, although they could not suppress the shock in their hearts. After a moment of observation, the two finally found out where the lake water had gone. There was water in the gravel under their feet, but it was just a very thin and shallow layer. It seeped in a certain direction along the cracks of the gravel, and then gradually converged into a flat stream, flowing to the low-lying place, and finally disappearing in the center of the lake. Nothing strange could be seen at the center of the lake, but the fact that so much water could be released in such a short period of time inevitably gave people a strange feeling. It was as if there was an ancient beast opening its greedy mouth there. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan looked at each other and walked toward the center of the lake, following the direction of the flowing water. However, after a few steps, he suddenly frowned, and his feet seemed to be filled with lead, and he could no longer lift them. Mo Shanshan, who was beside him, became extremely pale and seemed to be in extreme pain. What's going on? Ning Ke felt the frightening aura and frowned as he looked around, but he could not see anything unusual. There was a gravel at the bottom of the lake, and there was indeed nothing unusual. There were only stones. These stones were of different sizes and shapes. Some were hollow like works of art carved by the wind, some were round like drums, some were slender like a forest, and some looked strange and indescribable. Some stones were covered with thick moss, and some were as smooth as jade. However, no matter what kind of stones they were, there was no trace of lake water on them, as if they had not been soaked in the lake for thousands of years. The stones all over the mountains and valleys appeared in their sight, as if they appeared in their chests at the same time. Even the smooth stones were full of invisible sharp edges, which made people feel suffocated and uneasy when they saw them. That kind of feeling was neither comfortable nor painful, but full of resentment, unwillingness, and stubbornness. Ning Ke looked at these stones in front of him, and finally felt strange. Mo Shanshan beside him looked at these stones, and her pale face suddenly flushed. Her eyes were abnormally bright, and her thin lips trembled slightly. She said incredulously, "Is this the stone array tactics?" Ning Ke asked, "What is the stone array tactics?" Mo Shanshan said in a trembling voice, "The West Hill scripture once recorded a kind of tactical array. That kind of tactical array stretches between heaven and earth, and it is unimaginably powerful. Compared with it, the confinement divine tactical array of the Judicial Department is simply not worth mentioning." Her face was full of awe and admiration. Looking at the seemingly random stones around her, she said, "I always thought that this kind of tactical array could only exist in legends. I didn't expect that someone could really set it up successfully." Ning Ke asked curiously, "These stones are the legendary powerful tactical array stone array tactics that stretches between heaven and earth?" Mo Shanshan turned her head and looked into his eyes and said seriously, "The stone array tactics are stones. Due to the limitation of my body, I can't be too full in the recent updates. I don't think about the first place in April's monthly votes for the time being, but I still need to be ambitious. Otherwise, the energy of the stone array tactics is too strong, and it will not look good in the future. If you have the monthly votes, please encourage me. Although I can't guarantee the quantity, I can guarantee the quality." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 264. Ning Ke stood among the stones all over the mountains and valleys, feeling the aura. He covered his chest and frowned slightly. He did not speak for a long time. At this time, his chest seemed to be stuffed with dozens of hard pebbles, which were about to reach his throat. It was so suffocating and uncomfortable that he could not speak. Previously, he did not understand Mo Shanshan's words that the stone array tactics was a stone. It was not until these stones of different shapes filled his eye sockets and blocked his chest and abdomen that he realized that the so-called stone array tactics was the unfairness in his chest and abdomen that he did not know why. The unfairness eventually condensed into stones and could not be carefree. Stone was the most common and the most unusual thing in the world. It existed silently between heaven and earth for thousands of years. It could grow grass, but the grass was a foreign object. It could crack, but it was still a stone. Even if it was weathered into gravel, it was still a descendant of stone. Its body was so strong and pure, as if it would never change. Ning Ke looked at the thousands of stones between heaven and earth and could not help but think of some words that his master, Master Yensei, once said, "Pavilions and terraces will always be blown away by wind and rain, but the stone foundation will not be destroyed for thousands of years. It seems to be dirty, but it is extremely clean." Everything in the world had its own aura, which was the primordial qi. Jade and gold were inconvenient to be exposed. Only the stone was the most silent and low-key. Its aura was strong but deep inside, and it was never willing to release it wantonly. Therefore, for cultivators, the stone was the most difficult existence to perceive, and it was even more difficult to control. Thinking that these stones had existed quietly for countless years at the bottom of the lake, in the sea, in the mountains, under the ridges, and kept their own aura, but did not want to be known by heaven and earth, Ning Ke suddenly understood something. The cultivation method of Devil's Doctrine absorbed the aura of nature into the body, which was equivalent to creating one's own world in the body. In the doctrine of Haotian, this was a great blasphemy and disrespect, so it was called the devil by the world. How similar were the stones in the Great Blockage Formation to those who cultivated the cultivation method of Devil's Doctrine? Wasn't this unbearable stubbornness between heaven and earth the silent resistance to Haotian? When the talisman tactical was cultivated to a high level, it would converge into the same river. Mo Shanshan was addicted to talisman Taoism and tactical matrix. She felt the magic of this great blockage formation and found that she seemed to become a little naughty stone at the bottom of the water for thousands of years. The aura of the great blockage formation made her pale face show a sense of exhaustion, but she didn't care about the pain in her body at all. She looked around at the scattered stones and concentrated on the secrets hidden among them. Ning Ke looked at her tightly knitted eyebrows and shook his head, saying, "These stones imply a certain attitude. I think the person who had the ability and courage to set up this great blockage formation could only be the great divine priest of light who went to the wilderness to preach, but eventually betrayed Haotian and founded the Devil's Doctrine." Mo Shanshan raised her head, and her beautiful, slightly round cheeks were full of surprise and puzzlement. After a while, she understood that since this was the front gate of Devil's Doctrine, the superior who set up the Great Blockage Formation was certainly related to Devil's Doctrine. She believed in Ning Ke's inference. Although she was a little regretful that such a beautiful and magical big formation was created by the people of Devil's Doctrine, she didn't think too much about it. Her mind quickly immersed itself in the stones in the mountains and valleys again. The bottom of the lake was dry and gravel, and there were tens of thousands of stones lying in the wilderness. This kind of scenery was not beautiful, but in the eyes of the calligraphy addict, it was beautiful beyond compare. It contained great wisdom that made her heart palpitate. How to pour the stone array tactics in the heart. Looking at the tens of thousands of stones lying between the sky and the earth, the girl looked intoxicated and murmured, "That person used thousands of hectares of lake water to cover the sharp edges of the Great Blockage Formation with the lake water. When the cover formation was broken, the lake water would be drawn away according to the power of nature, and the Great Blockage Formation would reappear in the world. This kind of situation is really wonderful." Ning Ke had lived a hard life since he was a child. Although he could write well, he couldn't recite a good poem. His aesthetic was weak and boring. Facing the broken stones in the mountains, he really couldn't see anything beautiful, let alone the situation of the Great Blockage Formation. He only felt that the stones in his chest and abdomen were about to spew out from his throat. He was so uncomfortable that he was anxious to find a way to leave or go in. Looking at Mo Shanshan's intoxicated look, although he couldn't bear it, he had to interrupt her and asked, "Since this big formation is so powerful, can we go in?" It was said that the calligraphy addict was gentle and virtuous. However, once she was really intoxicated, she would completely forget the outside world and even her internal injuries. How could she wake up so easily? She didn't hear Ning Ke's words at all. She said sadly, "This Great Blockage Formation has been destroyed once. Now there is probably only 1 in 100 left. It's a pity." I don't know what the Great Blockage Formation would be like when it was opened in good condition. I don't know whether there will be anyone who can make the stone array tactics reappear in the world in the future. She was very sad, but Ning Ke was a little happy. He thought that if it were not so, they would have been dead long ago. He comforted her casually, "Let's find a way to go in first. In the future, you can study the tactical formation more. It's not difficult to make the stone array tactics reappear." Mo Shanshan was silent, and no one knew what she was thinking about. Her slightly sparse and slender eyelashes gently blinked. After a moment, her thin lips slightly opened, And she looked at Ning Ke and said seriously, 13th brother, you are right. There are very few people in the world who can see this stone array tactics. Since I have seen it and understood it, then I have to find a way to make it reappear in the world in the future. If I don't work hard to cultivate and study, the stone array tactics will really disappear. Then it will be my responsibility. Ning Ke didn't expect that a casual sentence could make her take the initiative to carry such a heavy responsibility. The inheritance in the cultivation world was always broken. It was naturally a good thing if she could pick up this magical tactical formation again. However, he was a little worried that such a heavy responsibility would affect her state of mind and cultivation.
He was speechless for a while.
Suddenly, he thought of a problem. The stones on the mountain were so powerful when only 1% of the power was left. What kind of invincible existence would it be when it was intact? This legendary tactical formation named Stone Array Tactics could make the calligraphy addict so intoxicated and leave its illustrious reputation in the West Hill Classics. But its foundation was actually destroyed by someone? Who on earth had the ability to destroy such a big tactical formation back then? Thinking of this question, he looked at an ordinary stone in front of him and squatted down. He slowly stretched out his fingers and gently stroked the 2 lines of moss on the stone. As his fingertips moved, the moss peeled off, revealing the deep marks inside. Those marks were clear sword marks. They had been covered by the lake water and moss for decades and had never seen the light of day. Ning Ke turned his head to look elsewhere and found that there were some stones in this great blockage formation with similar streaks of moss. Presumably, under those streaks of moss, there were also similar sword marks. The sword marks on the stone were divided into 2 lines. They were simple and even a little rough. One sword on the left and the other on the right were very casual, but they revealed an unparalleled sense of toughness. After many years, the moss attached to the sword marks and wrote a word. Ning Ke felt the touch of his fingertips and the remaining faint aura between the sword marks. He understood that these simple but powerful sword marks directly destroyed the foundation of the Great Blockage Formation. The aura between the sword marks was very familiar and very close. It was exactly the same as the aura that led him to this verdant valley a few days ago. However, it was much fainter. It should be the remnant of that aura. Then he noticed that the cross-section of some stones was too smooth, which was obviously cut. He found 3 pieces and put them together. He found that a whole stone was indeed cut into 3 pieces by 2 swords. The 3 pieces of broken stone were restored to a whole according to the smooth sword marks. A few wisps of dust sprayed out from the cracks, and the remaining aura also became a little stronger. Ning Ke silently looked at the sword marks on the stone in front of him, as if he once again saw the cedar stubbornly surviving on the top of the snow-capped peak. It was strong and proud but disdainful. It overlooked the common people but disdained to look at the sky. The aura of the person who broke the formation many years ago was very similar to that of the Great Blockage Formation. They were both so stubborn and full of sharpness. However, if one carefully tasted them, they were essentially different. The great divine priest of light, who founded the devil's doctrine 1,000 years ago, locked his unwillingness and resentment in the stone when he set up the Great Blockage Formation. He only stood between heaven and earth in a silent posture, using silence and sharpness to express his attitude and strength to heaven. The message transmitted by the remaining aura of the person who broke the formation decades ago was clearer and brighter. Although he was often silent, he never meant to lock himself. He was always free and generous. If there was a little dissatisfaction, he would straighten his waist and stab it. When he didn't say it, it was because he disdained to say it. Once he said it, he would let the whole heaven know. How to cast the Great Blockage Formation. Mo Shanshan said that there was only the lake water. Ning Ke looked at the sword marks on the stone and knew that there was another answer. At least there was one many years ago. Decades ago, it was still this verdant valley and the lake water was still in it. Suddenly, a strong wind blew and the tactical array of the front gate of Devil's Doctrine was activated. The lake water was emptied and the water fell and the stone came out. When the stone came out, the Great Blockage Formation appeared. It stretched between heaven and earth and blocked the way of the world. A scholar in a green robe rode a little black donkey and walked in the world. Suddenly, the road ahead was blocked. The rocks that filled the mountains and valleys made him unhappy. So he drew out the sword at his waist and cut the legendary Great Blockage Formation into pieces. Then, he rode on the little black donkey and continued to curse the heavens and the earth. His eyebrows and spirits were equally high, and he was very happy. How to cast the stone array? Just the righteous chi in his chest was enough. Decades later, Ninkei knelt before the sword mark on the stone and kowtowed 3 times respectfully. The familiar aura of the sword mark condensed into a mountain in his sense of perception. The mountain was high, but not dangerous, similar to the big mountain behind the academy. It made his eyes slightly sour and his chest filled with endless emotions. Such a person was indeed worthy of second brother's worship with his life and Mistress Jian's memory with the rest of her life. Naturally, he was also worthy of his unreasonable and vicissitudes of pride from his knees to the top of his head. This chapter is so satisfying to write. There are so many characters in the story that fit my aesthetic standards. I feel so good when I write about them. Today is Monday. Please support me with your recommendation votes. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chijian.com
to vote for me.
Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 265. At this time, Mo Shanshan was still immersed in the shock brought by the Great Blockage Formation and did not notice Ningquebec. She looked at the stones all over the mountain and valley and gradually frowned. She said, "Although it has been destroyed, the residual array intent is still strong. It is impossible to calculate it clearly in a short time. Do you still insist on going inside?" Their goal was to enter the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine to find the Tomes of Arcane. Especially now that they had confirmed where the strong and distant aura came from, Ninkei naturally would not give up halfway. He looked at her and asked, "Can we still retreat?" Mo Shanshan looked at the stones around her in silence. After a moment of calculation, she nodded and said, "We have just entered the array. If we retreat, we may not be able to retreat anymore. I don't know what kind of dangers are hidden inside." Ninkei looked at the mottled sword marks on the stones in front of him and suddenly said, "Do you believe in fate?" Mo Shanshan was slightly stunned and did not know why he would ask such a question at this time. Ninkei looked at her and said, "Now I believe in fate more and more. I entered the wilderness and came to this valley with a calligraphy addict who is proficient in tactical arrays. I believe that fate has already made arrangements for this." Mo Shanshan understood what he meant. At this moment, Ninkei suddenly sensed something. He suddenly turned around, pulled the iron bow, and put a talisman arrow on it. He aimed at a direction far away from the stones, and the arrowhead was pointing at the red shadow. Tao Addict Yi Hongyu appeared again. She stepped on the angular stones barefoot and quickly swept in this direction. Her bare legs under her red dress were tight and straight. Her left shoulder was still bleeding and her face was a little pale. It seemed that the outbreak of the aura of heaven and earth when the Great Blockage Formation was activated had caused some damage to her, but not too serious. The red dress flew and whistled. The distance between them seemed to be far, but was actually very close. Logically speaking, they should have come into contact immediately. However, it was very strange that the Tao Addict's trajectory inexplicably changed between the stones. She was moving forward in a straight line, but on the way, she turned to the right and then stopped and began to circle. Yi Hongyu stopped and stood on a stone in silence. She probably understood that it was because of the tactical array. Then she looked up at Ninkei and Mo Shanshan and said, "You're so lucky." If the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine had not been activated, Ninkei and Mo Shanshan might have been stabbed into 2 pools of blood by the Tao Addict's Taoist swords. That was why she said that they were lucky. The Great Blockage Formation was really magical. They were standing opposite each other and could hear each other, but it was not real. Ning Ke aimed the primordial 13 arrows at Yi Hongyu and confirmed that the light between the rocks was refracted in a strange way. Even the space was distorted, and he could not hit her. Action and reaction always complemented each other. The primordial 13 arrows could not aim at the Tao Addict, and the Tao Addict naturally could not find their real location in this pile of rocks. After confirming this, Ning Ke put away the iron bow and nodded to the Tao Addict on the stone not far away, as if she was just a passerby. Then he left silently with Mo Shanshan and walked toward the place where the water fell. As the two walked deeper into the center of the lake, the remaining water between the soles of their boots and the gravel became thinner and thinner. However, the intent of the array stones between the rocks became stronger and stronger. The chi of heaven and earth was extremely impeded here. The invisible and intangible air seemed to have sharp edges, which made every simple breath very painful. Ning Ke rubbed his cheeks that were numb because of the blockage in his chest and abdomen. He asked Mo Shanshan. She should think of going to the place where the water fell. Do you think it is possible that she is faster than us? Mo Shanshan's face was pale, and her slightly sparse eyelashes looked so weak. She said softly, I can find some paths in the Great Blockage Formation, but she can't. Only a person with a strong heart could walk to the end of his own path, and a person with a strong heart would naturally be stubborn and proud in some aspects. At this time, Mo Shanshan was calculating the tactical array, and her mind was exhausted. However, the indifferent words of, she can't, naturally revealed a bit of strength. Hearing this, Ning Ke immediately felt relieved and continued to help her move forward. They walked cautiously and slowly in the rocks. As time went by, Mo Shanshan's mind became more and more scattered, and her body became weaker. Although she still forcibly kept her mind clear and pointed in the direction, she was almost unable to stand even if she was supported. Ning Ke looked at her pale cheeks and slightly trembling long eyelashes. He shook his head and directly carried her on his back. Without waiting for her to speak, he directly said, I'm relatively sturdy, so I can hold on for a while. Mo Shanshan gently agreed and did not resist. She slowly leaned her face on his shoulder, and her black hair poured down from Ning Ke's chest like a waterfall. She closed her eyes and calmly looked as if she was sleeping, only occasionally pointing in the direction. The array intent in the rocks was rugged, and the sharp air directly penetrated into the body from the air, which was extremely uncomfortable and painful. Moreover, he had to carry a person on his back at this time. Although Ning Ke said he could hold on, in fact, he was almost unable to. However, he had once walked on the difficult mountain road in the back of the Academy's mountain, and he had walked on many similar painful roads. More importantly, every time he really could not hold on, he could occasionally see the clear sword marks and moss on the stones beside the road, which would instill a strong motivation and courage in his body. Decades ago, that person broke into the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine with only a sword. At that time, the Great Blockage Formation was intact, and its power was 100 times stronger than today, but that person still broke in. After decades, as that person's junior, how could he not inherit his strong will and give up halfway to make that person lose face? The Tao Addict, Yi Hongyu, stood on the stone and looked at the two figures gradually disappearing in the rocks. Her clothes had been torn in many places, and the blood scabs on her shoulders were extremely horrible. Moreover, she was the only one left here at this time, which made her look a little lonely. She did not recognize that this pile of rocks was the legendary Great Blockage Formation, but she knew that these rocks contained a terrible array force. Even as strong as she would feel afraid in front of these rocks. Suddenly, she shouted angrily, and the sound spread back among the rocks, hitting the higher cliff of the verdant valley and then bouncing back. The emptiness made her more lonely and speechless. The angry shout stopped abruptly. She tore off a corner of her skirt and silently tied up the wound on her shoulder. She ignored the spring breeze under her body and jumped off the stone, following the last thin layer of water, and walked to the center of the lake. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace had once praised this girl for being proficient in all kinds of dharma. However, although she was obsessed with cultivation, she could never touch the world of talisman arrays. She only guessed that the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine should be at the beginning of the bottom of the water, in the center of this dry lake. However, she did not know how to get through this pile of rocks and reach the place she wanted to reach. Based on the sight on the stone and the perception of psyche power, she made her own judgment. However, after a few steps among the rocks, she found that she had lost her direction again. The various kinds of rocks scattered around her were like the peach trees at the southern foot of the Peach Mountain. They had the magical ability to distort space. If she went on like this, she might never reach the center of the lake. Perhaps she would be trapped in this pile of rocks forever, until she finally broke down and died of thirst and madness. Yi Hongyu looked behind her and confirmed that there was still a chance of survival if she left this pile of rocks. If she took a few more steps, she would be trapped in the stone array, and it would be difficult to get out. She could not help but fall into a long silence. Then she noticed the moss on the stones and the sword marks that had been hidden under the moss for decades. She vaguely remembered who left these sword marks. Her indifferent eyes suddenly became extremely bright. Her body trembled with excitement, and blood seeped out from her shoulder. In the eyes of cultivators who were qualified to know the secrets of the past, the madman who broke into the front gate with a single sword and destroyed the Devil's Doctrine with a wave of his sleeve was undoubtedly the most powerful man in the world. Although the madman who destroyed the Devil's Doctrine with a single sword became the unparalleled enemy of the West Hill Divine Palace and was finally punished by heaven, no one on the Peach Mountain, including the 3 great divine priests, was willing to mention his name. However, the Tao addict was obsessed with cultivation, fighting, and improving her strength. She wanted to be the most powerful man in the world and admired the most powerful man. Therefore, ever since she knew the story, she had secretly worshipped the most powerful man in the world. In the present world, she idolized her brother. In the past thousands of years, she idolized the madman. Today, she had suffered many setbacks and was in a humiliating situation because of this pile of rocks. At this moment, she suddenly saw the sword marks left by the man she worshipped so passionately. She was so shocked that she could not speak. She finally saw the traces of the legend, saw the historical scenes, and saw the state that she worshipped and yearned for. Suddenly, a sense of pride rose in her chest, and she breathed out the edge of the shattering array. In a breath, Yi Hongyu's expression calmed down. She slowly pulled out the Taoist sword from her waist and held it horizontally in front of her. Facing the moss marks on the stone in front of her, she said decisively, "Mr. Ke's sword style is before me. How dare I disappoint you?" As soon as she finished speaking, the wind of the sword rose. She calmly and attentively chopped at the stone in front of her. She did not know the array, and did not know how to find a path. Therefore, she simply chopped all the stones in front of her, hoping to carve out a path. She did not know whether it was right or wrong to do so, but in front of the sword style of the predecessor, she just wanted to do so. The water of the Daming Lake had dissipated, leaving the ground full of rocks. Compared with the verdant valley, it looked extremely desolate and frightening. Tang stood at the original lakeside and looked down at the rocks. After a moment of silence, he said, "Everything changed after that man came. The stone array tactics became different from before." Tang Xiaotang stood beside her brother and curiously looked at the pile of rocks below. Listening to the faint sound of metal cutting rocks, she stuck out her tongue and sighed. "That woman is really crazy." Tang said, "The world calls us demons. How can we be less crazy if we want to enter the holy land of the Enlightenment doctrine to find out what a demon is? As the saying goes, how can one become a demon without going crazy?" That person was the same back then. This was Tang Xiaotang's first time coming to her own sect's holy land. She nervously asked, "Brother, are we really going to let them go in like this? The Enlightenment doctrine's sacred land has always been known as a land of death. Even if you enter, you don't know if you can come out alive. For the sake of the tomes of arcane that have disappeared long ago, these people really don't care about life and death. Thinking that Ning Ke had probably entered the front gate of the Holy Land at this time, Tang's two cast-iron eyebrows suddenly furrowed. He seemed to feel that there was something he couldn't understand. He said to himself, "Are you going to keep watching? Could it be that you have the confidence to enter the Holy Land to save him? Don't tell me you were really on the other end 14 years ago?" Friendly advertisement: a wretched fat panda's new book, Dark Judgment. Please go and watch it if you're interested. The book number is 227-8933. Please support me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 266. In the verdant valley, beside a dry lake, on top of a pile of rocks, Tang Xiaodang untied the beast's tail on her collar, revealing her white and tender face. She listened to the sound of a sword breaking the rocks and asked, "Brother, is the tomes of arcane really inside?" Tang shook his head and said, "I don't know." Tang Xiaodang was puzzled and asked, "Then why did those old guys from the Divine Hall send people here?" Tang said, "According to the news from the Central Plains, the great divine priest of Revelation issued a decree after returning from the south. He said that the tomes of arcane will appear when the Holy Land opens." Tang Xiaodang scratched her head and asked, "But didn't you say that the Holy Land became a ruin after it was destroyed and there was nothing inside? Why is the old guy called Priest of Revelation so sure that the tomes of arcane are here?" Tang said, "The three great divine priests of the Divine Hall each have their own profound attainments. The great divine priest of Revelation sensed the will of Haotian. It is said that he may even have the ability of prophecy."
Who would not believe what he said?
Tang Xiaodang suddenly thought of the Taoist priest who sang on the cliff peak. She did not know why there was a trace of fear in her heart. She asked, "Brother, do you think that person will come to snatch the tomes of arcane?" Tang Xiaodang was silent for a long time and shook his head. "No, because there is someone more important than the tomes of arcane in his heart." As time went by, the night grew longer in the extreme north of this world, and the weather became colder. In this mountain abandoned by Haotian, the verdant valley that had disappeared for decades reappeared. The Daming Lake was emptied, and the legendary Great Blockage Formation was reactivated. The Chi of Heaven and Earth was attached to the snow-capped peak and pointed to the sky. How amazing it was! The Chi of Heaven and Earth caused by the reopening of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was extinguished in a very short time, but this wave still spread out of the vast snow mountain and spread to more distant places. In the wilderness on the outskirts of the Tianqi Mountains, black soil and white snow mixed together. Occasionally, one could see dead beasts on the snowy ground. The cold winter wind was like a knife blowing against the tents, making them flutter. They themselves were the sharpest hunting knives. Yi Su walked silently between heaven and earth. The ordinary Taoist robe on his body was as smooth as a cliff wall, completely unaffected by the cold wind. He seemed to be walking normally with his knees raised, but in an instant he walked more than 100 feet straight. His footsteps landed on the floating snow without leaving a trace, and he floated like an immortal. When the primal chi of heaven and earth from the reopening of the Devil's Doctrine in the distant mountains reached his world from behind, he slowly stopped and looked back expressionlessly. However, he had no intention of going over to take a look. As a world wayfarer of the Jisho Abbey, Yi Su knew about the great divine priest of relations edict earlier than anyone else. He even knew that the Ming hand scroll of the 7 tomes of arcane would reappear in the wilderness before the great divine priest of relation himself. However, for a cultivator at his level, he could even see through the gates of death. Naturally, he could see through all external objects and would not let those external objects affect his heart, even if those external objects were heavenly tomes. Moreover, he had made a bet with Tang on the promise of breaking the realm between Ning Ke and Long Qing. Since he had lost, he naturally had to admit defeat. It was not a matter of whether he could see through it or not, but he could not allow himself to leave any shadow in his state of mind. His appearance in the wilderness had nothing to do with the tomes of arcane, the desolate man's southward journey, or the reopening of the Devil's Doctrine's front gate. He had lived in the abbey since he was a child, and the 6 volumes of Tomes of Arcane were his first books since he could read. He had looked at the world coldly since he was a child. The desolate man's southward journey might be a big deal to the secular world, but it could not attract his attention at all. The reopening of the Devil's Doctrine's front gate was relatively interesting. However, the Devil's Doctrine had already withered and was no longer a threat. There were too few people or things in this world that were qualified to make him leave the Jisho Abbey. However, the person who stood on the other end of the line 14 years ago was definitely qualified. Yisu really wanted to meet that person. He had thought about it for many years, but that person had always been in the mountain and beside the mountain. Even someone as proud and powerful as him could not get close to that person. This year, the person on the other end of the line finally left the mountain and came to the wilderness. He did not know where that person was, but he knew that he would meet that person, because the unique temperament of the mountain and that person's temperament had determined this. That person wanted to protect the little guy called Ning Quebec. So when Ning Ke was really in danger, that person must be beside him. So he only needed to wait until Ning Ke was really in danger. But at this time, Ning Ke was outside the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Why did he leave the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine and head south? There was a big blue lake in the south of the Tianqi Mountain. It was the Hulun Sea, which was regarded as the holy land by the grassland barbarians. At this time, there was a thin layer of ice floating on the surface of the lake. The men of the grassland tribes who had lived by the lake for generations were fishing for some aquatic plants in the lake before the ice was completely sealed. Wherever there were grassland barbarians, there would often be caravans from the Central Plains. However, it was after all the winter, and the war between the grassland and the Central Plains coalition army had just ended. It was a little strange for a caravan from the Central Plains to appear by the Hulun Sea. However, these merchants were extravagant and had paid the deposit for leather goods at the end of next summer. So the tribal headmen acquiesced to their existence and even allocated a camp for them. The caravan from the Central Plains was cooking by the lake. Dozens of people were sitting around the fire. Taking advantage of the rare sunny weather, they did not enter the tents to avoid the cold. Looking at their actions, it seemed that they were led by one of the merchants. The rather stout merchant was gnawing on a greasy leg of lamb and grumbling from time to time. It was obvious that he was not very satisfied with the hospitality of the grassland barbarians. A burly middle-aged man wearing a felt hat next to him, who was probably a steward or a bodyguard, tried to persuade him in a soft voice. However, he was scolded instead. All of a sudden, countless white clouds appeared in the clear blue sky. It was as if an invisible giant hand had directly torn the blue canvas apart and the white paint behind it seeped out. The grassland barbarians and the merchants from the Central Plains noticed the strange phenomenon in the sky at the same time and looked up in surprise. The leader of the merchants cursed a few times. The well-built middle-aged guard with a respectful expression narrowed his eyes as he looked at the clouds in the sky. His expression gradually turned solemn. For some unknown reason, the stout merchant became serious when he saw the solemn expression of the middle-aged man. He did not dare to scold him anymore. He lowered his head to hide the awe in his eyes and asked a few questions in a low voice. The middle-aged man looked at the white clouds in the sky quietly and felt the fluctuation of the aura of heaven and earth coming from the foothills in the far north. His face, which was covered by the shadow of the felt hat, slowly revealed a very complicated expression. It was an expression of nostalgia, warmth, and calmness after a long time. However, it was also mixed with some extremely faint regret and sadness. Then the middle-aged man said very succinctly, "The door is open." Ning Ke carried Emo Shanshan's weak body on his back and stepped on the stones on the ground with difficulty. When he reached the center of the lake, he saw a very large stone door. The stone door was so huge that it looked like a small mountain when looked up from below. Even the most magnificent city in the world, Chang'an, did not have such a magnificent and huge stone door. Because of its huge size, this was the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Ning Ke did not think that he would find the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine so easily. For a moment, he could not believe his eyes. He could not understand how such a magnificent and huge stone door was hidden in the Daming Lake and why he did not see it when he walked in the Great Blockage Formation. He subconsciously looked back at the way he came. When he walked in the rugged stones and the fierce formation, he could not see the stone door at all. However, when he walked out, the stone door appeared in front of him, as if the stone door was only willing to be seen by the person it chose. Opening the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was even easier than finding the front gate. He did not need to recite any incantation, nor did he need any amazing and terrible mechanism. When Ning Ke's right hand gently touched the rough and solemn surface of the stone door, there was a soft sound. Countless years of accumulated dust splashed out from the cracks of the stone door, and then the stone door slowly opened. Ning Ke looked up at the snow-capped peak, which was even more towering and majestic than before. Then his eyes met Emo Shanshan's shocked and weak eyes, and he stepped in. Majesty, solemnity, grandeur, holiness. This kind of special feeling was often built on a huge scale. For example, Chang'an City, which the goshawk did not dare to fly over, and the divine hall on the Peach Mountain overlooking the common people. When these buildings and the small human body formed a strong contrast, this kind of feeling would be produced. When they walked into the huge stone door and climbed up tens of thousands of long stone steps, they came to the main hall of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. These feelings instantly occupied the minds of Ning Ke and Emo Shanshan. Because the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine they saw was more magnificent and huge than any building they had seen before. The front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was in the mountain, or more precisely, in the majestic snow-capped peak by the Daming Lake. The Devil's Doctrine was in a huge space formed after the belly of a towering snow-capped peak was completely hollowed out. This space was so big that it was completely unimaginable. No one knew how deep it was, and no one knew how high it was. It was even so big that it gave people the illusion that this was a place that could only appear in dreams, a world that only Haotian had the power to open up. No one knew where the clear light came from, but there were countless thick and huge stone beams lying across the space. These stone beams had clear and orderly marks made by knives and axes. They were extremely thick, and the surface was enough for 4 horse carriages to run side by side. The two looked at the wide and straight stone beam in front of them and felt that they could not see the end of the stone beam at all. However, the thick stone beams in the distance were like extremely thin spider silk in the huge space. The thick stone beams gathered in the middle like a spider web and finally converged into a stone platform in the middle of the distant rocky peak. A palace could be seen on the platform from afar. The palace should be huge, but looking at it from the cliff, it looked like a hollow microsculpture carved by a skilled craftsman on a grain of rice. As for Ning Ke and Emo Shanshan, who were far away from the palace, they seemed to not exist in this huge space, like a grain of sand between the rock walls. The two looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. In the face of such an incredible and magnificent existence, no one would be able to suppress a sense of awe. They would want to kneel down and worship it, and even cry because of their own insignificance. Because in front of such a magnificent world, human beings could only be ants. However, what really shocked Ning Ke was that this huge space that only Haotian had the power to open up was actually opened up by those ant-like human beings 1,000 years ago. After thinking about the chapter name for more than 10 minutes, I really can't think of a better one. Because I care a little, I always want to come up with a good one. It's really a headache. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 267. After a long time, Ning Ke gradually woke up from the shock, but his emotions were still complicated. It was also the legendary unknown place. The back mountain of the academy only gave people a sense of closeness and warmth, but it did not give people a spiritual impact like this place. He thought that this was probably the difference that Emo Shanshan had mentioned that day. The back mountain of the academy could connect the saints and the secular world, while the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was indifferent to the secular world. The front gate of the Devil's Doctrine had long been abandoned after being buried by the wind and snow in Tianqi Mountain for decades. It looked desolate, and the more spacious and majestic it was, the more desolate it felt. Ning Ke thought of the scene when the Devil's Doctrine was still strong, and countless believers knelt on the huge stone beam to worship. He could not help but sigh. It was hard to imagine that the desolate man 1,000 years ago could dig such a huge space in the middle of the snow-capped peak. Ning Ke thought that it was the Tang Empire that drove the desolate man out of the wilderness and to the cold region of the far north. He could not help but sigh and feel a strong sense of pride. Then, through the magnificent and almost nature-defying architectural space in front of him, he thought of more things. The Devil's Doctrine was not tolerated in the world because the cultivators of the Devil's Doctrine forcibly absorbed the heaven and earth into their bodies, which blasphemed Haotian. The great divine priest of light, who founded the Devil's Doctrine, let the desolate man dig such a space in the Tianqi Mountain that was almost like a miracle. Perhaps he wanted to prove that humans could also have the same ability as Haotian through this place? In the world where Haotian shone, it was extremely arrogant to use this silent way to express disrespect to Haotian. No wonder the Enlightenment doctrine was called the devil. After standing at the edge of the rock wall and watching silently for a long time, Ning Ke helped Mo Shanshan up the stone beam. The thick stone beam connected the space in the middle of the snow-capped peak and finally converged in the distant sky. The stone beam was so wide and thick that it could accommodate 4 horse carriages side by side. Looking at the impact marks and gravel, it could be confirmed that the rocks that fell from the top of the cave for thousands of years could not break the stone beam. It was even more impossible for the two of them to walk on it. However, the stone beam was suspended high in the air, and there was no shelter around it. The mountain wind whistled, and the echoes slowly reverberated, giving people an extremely terrifying feeling. Ning Ke looked at the empty world outside the stone beam and listened to the wind in his ears. He felt that his legs were a little stiff. He thought that if he was blown out of the stone beam by the mountain wind, he might have to fly in the air for a long time before falling into the deep and dark underground. The stone beam leading to the center of the huge space was very long. The two of them walked for a long time, but they had only covered less than 1/3 of the distance. The palace on the distant suspended stone platform was still as small as a miniature landscape. However, the feeling of insignificance and fear in the magnificent space gradually faded as they walked. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan walked much faster than at the beginning. He could even spare some attention to look at the scenery around the stone beam, even though the stone beam was completely dark and empty. There was no scenery at all. Then he noticed that deep lines suddenly appeared under his feet. Those lines were deeply engraved into the hard stone beam and seemed to extend in all directions irregularly. There were extremely small gravel rolling in the lines with the mountain wind. Ning Ke looked at it carefully with the help of the light falling from above. He found that the lines on the stone beams combined to form a very concise painting. The strokes of the painting were clumsy and powerful. It should have been engraved by metal weapons inside the axes and knives. It looked like some kind of ancient rock painting. The rock paintings on the stone beam gradually appeared in front of them as they walked. These rock paintings were very large, and there were many of them. The first rock painting was a painting of a monstrous flood. A man with a blurred face, wearing clothes that looked like a grass skirt around his waist and holding a pick in his hand, stood on the cliff by the flood and roared angrily at the rainy sky. The second rock painting was a painting of wildfire in the mountains. Several women with blurred faces, wearing coarse short skirts and holding a basin of water in their hands, stood in the bamboo forest by the wildfire and cried bitterly at the burning wheat fields. The third rock painting was a painting of heavy snow that covered the sky. Dozens of farmers with blurred faces, wrapped in thick animal skins and holding all kinds of tools in their hands, ignored the falling snowflakes and silently and attentively repaired the houses. The fourth rock painting was a painting of the quaking earth. Thousands of black spots without faces stood in the scarred fields, as if they were burying the dead and saving the living. They did not roar or cry, but continued with their lives. Every rock painting depicted the anger of Haotian when he descended to the human world. It depicted the pain and struggle of human beings. No matter how blurred the faces of the people in the rock paintings were, they clearly showed the identity of human beings. The rock paintings on the stone beam were still spreading forward. With the mastery of tools, determination, and understanding of nature, human beings became calmer and calmer in the face of all kinds of disasters. Perhaps they were still sad and angry, but no matter what, they survived and lived until now. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan looked at the rock paintings under their feet as they walked. Their expressions gradually became solemn. Although they could not fully understand or be sure of the real intention of the people of the Devil's Doctrine to carve these rock paintings on the stone beam, as a member of human beings, they would always have some vague feelings. At the very front of the stone beam, the last rock painting was very simple, with fewer lines than all the previous rock paintings. At the bottom were 3 straight lines mixed with countless small stone holes, probably representing human beings who had already multiplied and occupied the whole world. Those small stone holes seemed to be the hands of human beings who had raised high in celebration. Above the 3 straight lines, the deep stone lines formed a circle and a semicircle. Mo Shanshan frowned slightly and looked at the simple and incomprehensible patterns under her feet. She thought about what kind of information it contained, but no matter how she thought, she had no clue. Ning Ke stared at the last rock painting, and his hand holding Mo Shanshan trembled slightly. He felt a little cold and vaguely guessed something, but felt that his guess was too absurd. Unfortunately, at this time in the abandoned front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, there was no time for him to think carefully about these questions of fauvism, symbolism, and dolly. Even if he wanted to think about it, the scene he saw after leaving the stone beam and stepping on the stone platform suspended in the middle of the snow-capped space did not allow him to think about it. Countless stone beams converged at this place, forming a natural stone platform. The stone platform floated tens of meters high in the air. The mountain wind whistled in from outside the platform, blowing the dust off the palaces and making them fall to the ground. There were countless piles of white bones outside the palace, and the floating dust fell through the gaps between the bones and did not fly up again. This process had been repeated countless times over the decades, so a layer of dust about a palm thick had accumulated under the eerie white bones, making people feel that these bones were lying in the river mud. Walking down the stone beam, Ning Ke first saw the eaves of the Devil's Doctrine, and then the white bones in the dust outside the Devil's Doctrine, and then he could no longer move his eyes away. When the Devil sect was destroyed, it was unknown what kind of tragic battle it had experienced. There were so many dead people in the periphery. As time passed, these corpses had already turned into white bones. Only the sharp cuts on them and the scattered bones in the surroundings could prove some of the cruelty in the past. Ning Ke helped Mo Shanshan pass through the pile of white bones and came to the stone steps near the main hall and found several complete corpses. The white bones inside the armor were protected by heavy armor, so they did not fall. Some of the skeletons still held their weapons tightly in their hands, and they did not let go for decades after they died. He had seen too many dead people in his life, and had seen crueler scenes, so he could still maintain his calm, and even squatted down to carefully study these complete corpses. However, Mo Shanshan had never seen such a horrible and cruel scene. Her beautiful face looked a little pale, and she clenched her hands tightly, unable to say a word. The weapons held in the hands of the dead were obviously extraordinary, and even after decades, they were still cold. Ning Ke noticed that there was a strong aura of talisman on the armor these people were wearing, and he was shocked. He thought that these people must have been the most powerful powerhouses in the Devil's Doctrine in the past. He stretched out his fingers and gently brushed off the dust on the armor, trying to see the talisman clearly. However, he did not expect that when his fingertips touched the surface of the armor, there was a crisp crack, and the seemingly indestructible armor instantly cracked. The crisp sound rang out continuously, and the armor on the former powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine in front of the stone steps all cracked, and the strong aura of talisman on it dissipated in the air and could no longer be felt. The broken parts of the armor were smooth and shiny, and it was obvious that it had been directly cut by a sharp weapon like a sword. Who could use a sword to cut such a strong armor so easily? Moreover, the sword style had not been released, and it had been condensed in the armor for decades, and only suddenly burst out when Ning Ke touched it with his fingers today. Ning Ke had his own answer in his heart, and he remained silent. Mo Shanshan had been shocked earlier, and seeing his silence, she could see that he was somewhat calm. She could not help but feel a little ashamed, and also some other feelings. The two walked up the stone steps and pushed open the door of the hall. They went straight to the point and saw a stone tablet that was as large as a mountain. This stone tablet seemed to be polished from a whole piece of rock, and its surface was extremely smooth. The wordless tablet. Mo Shanshan was the first to notice the stone tablet and thought of the legends she had heard, and said in surprise. Ning Ke was vigilantly paying attention to the movements around him and subconsciously asked, "What is the wordless tablet?" Mo Shanshan said in a daze, "The great divine priest of light, who betrayed Haotian and founded the Devil's Doctrine, once said that only time can hear those who know me and those who sin against me. So when he died, he asked that there be no words left on the tablet and let the world judge it. So the great divine priest of light is buried under this tablet?" Ning Ke looked up in shock, and then his expression became even more shocked. Because there were words on the wordless tablet. A line of arrogant words. Ko Haoran of the Academy destroyed the Devil's Doctrine here. Please vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 268. The words on the steel were deeply etched into the stone, with the sharpness left by the tip of a sword. Ning Ke looked at the row of words on the steel and slowly raised his eyebrows. He did not express any emotion and just looked at it silently for a long time. Then he left without saying a word, avoiding the scattered white bones at his feet to look at the side. He walked around the wordless steel a few times and finally went back to the front of the steel. He looked up at the steel again and raised his eyebrows as if they were about to fly up. He pointed at the words on the steel and said with a smile, "My youngest uncle wrote it." Mo Shanshan had once heard from her teacher that the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was destroyed by a senior sublime being. However, for some reason, the name of the sublime being did not spread. She had once guessed that it might be the senior of the Academy who disappeared after a glimpse of the world, but there was no evidence. This time, when she came to the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine in the wilderness, she saw Ning Ke's strange expression along the way, especially when he knelt in the stone array tactics. This made her even more certain of her guess. Now that she finally got the confirmation from Ning Ke, she still felt a little shocked and speechless. How powerful was the senior who destroyed the Devil's Doctrine with a single sword? She slightly frowned and pursed her thin red lips into a line. After a moment of silence, she looked at Ning Ke's frowning eyebrows and relaxed expression and said softly, "You seem to be very proud." Ning Ke nodded honestly. In order to resolve the mental impact brought by the steel inscription, he had looked around and found that the remaining aura of the dead powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine was still strong. In particular, the white bones seemed to be harder than ordinary steel. He could not help but be shocked that so many powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine were as vulnerable as the spring snow in front of youngest uncle's Haoran sword. From this, one could imagine how terrifying youngest uncle's state was back then. In the back of the mountain of the Academy, Ning Ke had already known that youngest uncle was definitely the world's most ferocious person through the indirect reaction of second brother and others. However, he still did not expect youngest uncle to be so ferocious. Could it be that when he broke through the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, he had already surpassed the 5 states and achieved the King's Way of the Sage? As a disciple of the second floor of the Academy, there was no reason for him not to feel proud to have such a youngest uncle. However, pride could not be eaten. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan had come to the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine through untold hardships for the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane and the aura left by youngest uncle. After standing in front of the stone tablet and silently observing and thinking for a while, they continued to walk into the hall. He felt that youngest uncle's aura was in the hall behind the stone tablet. The main hall of the Devil's Doctrine was still grand and majestic. The seemingly simple structure of the stone beams was painted with complicated oil paintings, which naturally gave it a sense of sacredness. There were hundreds of stone statues on both sides of the wide passageway. They were carved with strange gods and devils that were rarely seen in the countries of the Central Plains. The passageway gradually became deeper and deeper, but it was still dry without a trace of moisture. Fortunately, when the desolate man built this place, the design of ventilation and daylighting was particularly exquisite. Ning Ke and Zhou Badong could still see things with their eyes after walking hundreds of steps inside. As they went deeper into the main hall of the Devil's Doctrine, the aura that moved Ning Ke became stronger and stronger, gradually becoming a kind of real existence. He looked ahead silently, not knowing what he would see later. Whether it was the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane or the secret of the Devil's Doctrine, no matter which one it was, he only hoped that he would not see what he did not want to see. There were also more and more corpses in the passageway. At the turn, the bones even piled up and formed a small hill. Ning Ke supported Mo Shanshan as they walked. Looking at the increasingly deep sword marks on the wall, he could not help but feel his heart palpitate as he imagined the bloody battle that had happened here in the past. At the end of the passageway of the main hall of the Devil's Doctrine was a very ordinary room. This room should have been very spacious, but now a small hill of bones and dried corpses occupied the center of the room, making it extremely narrow and crowded. How many people died back then? Mo Shanshan looked at the pile of bones and corpses in front of her and subconsciously sighed softly. Her little hands were a little cold, and her voice was also a little shaky. As the core disciple of the Divine Hall's master of calligrapher, she had never liked or sympathized with the Devil's Doctrine. However, today, even she could not bear to think about the despair of the Devil's Doctrine back then. Ning Ke looked at the small hill of bones and said after a moment of silence, I also do not know why youngest uncle wanted to destroy the Devil's Doctrine back then, but I think he must have his own reasons and reasons. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from the depths of the pile of bones. Many times in the world, there are many things that actually do not need a reason or a reason. Because those reasons and reasons, if you look at it from another perspective, are often delusional. Now, there are countless explanations as to why he did what he did back then, but the truth is that he came that year and did what he did. This room originally only had the silent pile of bones and the silent sword marks on the stone walls. It was so quiet that it seemed as if it did not belong to the human world. Therefore, the voice that suddenly sounded was very faint, but very clear. This voice was very soft and very weak, with a sense of neutrality and peace. However, in the ears of Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan, not only was it very clear, but it was more like a thunder, which had nothing to do with the quiet environment. The Verdant Valley had disappeared from the depths of the vast Tianqi Mountains for decades. The Daming Lake had disappeared for decades. The front gate of the Devil's Doctrine had also been isolated from the world for decades. According to the knowledge and speculation of the world, this place had long become a ruin, and it was impossible for there to be any life. This was also what the two saw.
There were only white bones and sword marks in the past.
Who would have thought that there was actually someone alive here? Ning Ke was shocked, speechless. He pulled Mo Shanshan behind him as fast as he could, and then he pulled his bow and arrow, aiming at the pile of bones with his most powerful weapon. Looking carefully, he found that there was a person in the pile of bones. The person was very old, so old that his hair and teeth were all gone. Only 2 strands of extremely long white eyebrows were fluttering on his face, almost reaching his shriveled chest. The person was wearing an extremely old monk's robe, which had long been tattered, hanging in front of his body like his eyebrows. The person was very thin, so thin that his chest and abdomen were sunken, and his limbs were as thin as firewood. There was no muscle or fat on his body, and his craggy bones were wrapped in a thin layer of skin. In particular, his deep eye sockets looked like two terrifying black holes. However, the gaze from the eye sockets was so compassionate and warm. Except for the thin and tight skin that had lost its elasticity and luster, the old monk was no different from the bones around him. Therefore, it was very difficult to find him sitting in the pile of bones. There were two very thin iron chains that pierced through the old monk's broken drum-like abdomen, and the other end was nailed to the hard wall behind him. The blood from decades ago had already turned black, smeared on the threads of the monk's robe. This scene was very strange, and the old monk in the scene was very terrifying. Ning Kei's fingers trembled slightly, and he almost let go of the bowstring and shot an arrow. Mo Shanshan covered her mouth tightly and almost screamed out loud, if not for the compassionate and warm gaze of the skinny and terrifying old monk. "Who are you?" Ning Kei pulled the bowstring tightly and aimed at the old monk in the pile of bones as he asked nervously. This was the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, which had been isolated from the world for decades. It was really hard to understand the sudden appearance of such an old monk. This old monk was so skinny, and yet he was still alive. This was beyond the scope of ordinary people's thinking. And anything that was beyond common sense and incomprehensible usually contained great danger.
"Who am I?"
The old monk slowly raised his head, and the iron chains that pierced through his abdomen clinked. Perhaps it was because of the pain in his body. A trace of pain appeared on his skinny face. The gaze in his deep eyes was still warm, but with a sense of loss and reminiscence. After a long time, a trace of understanding suddenly appeared in the old monk's eyes. He moved the paper-like skin at the corner of his lips and revealed a trace of an ugly smile. He said, "I am a person who has bound myself. I made a huge mistake in the past, and it was a lifelong regret. So I used iron chains to bind myself here, and swore to use the rest of my life to release these dead souls from purgatory. I hope to atone for my sins." The iron chains pierced through his body, and the slightest movement of the old monk would cause him to reveal traces of pain. But his weak voice and gaze were still so calm and compassionate, like a spring breeze. Ning Kei looked at the old monk, who was as skinny as a ghost, and asked blankly, "Atone for what sins?" The iron chains clinked again. The skinny old monk smiled at the white skeletal corpses around him. He stretched out his finger with difficulty and slowly stroked the edge of a white leg bone in front of him. He said, "To atone for the sins of murder." "The sins of murder?" The old monk looked at him and said calmly, "I entered Buddhism at the age of 20 and then became a Buddha. I thought that I was compassionate and would release all living beings from purgatory with the light of Buddha. Who would have thought that there would be a ground full of white bones because of me? This is my sin of murder." Ning Kei understood the words, but he did not understand them. The front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was full of white bones. Legend had it that they were the souls of youngest uncle's sword. Looking at the sword marks and the row of words on the wordless steel, the truth should not be far from the legend. Why did this skinny old monk say that this was his sin of murder? "You know my youngest uncle?" he asked. The old monk looked at the two of them like an elder looking at his juniors. He asked gently, "If Crazy Ko is your youngest uncle, then you are the disciple of the headmaster of the academy. Then who is this little girl?" Ning Kei and Mo Shanshan felt the kindness and trust of the other party and even felt a touch of warmth from being pampered. They subconsciously revealed their identities. The old monk sighed softly and said, "I thought that I would spend the rest of my life in the long atonement day and would never see anyone again. I never thought that I would meet an old friend again. So, the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine is open?" Then he looked at Ning Kei and said in confusion, "You are this generation's world wayfarer of the academy? It seems that you have just entered the see-through state 10 days ago. How can your state be so low? Is the academy getting worse with each generation?" Then, the old monk looked at Imo Shanshan and said with a sigh, "Sitting on the Bone Mountain, I don't hear the morning drum and evening bell, and I don't know how many years have passed. I feel that I have only slept for a while, and now I have a successor." Ning Ke knew that he was the worst world wayfarer in the history of the academy, and he was embarrassed to be pointed out by the old monk. But he thought that this old monk had been sitting at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine for decades, called Youngest Uncle Crazy Ko, and called the Sage of Calligrapher Young King. He must be a secluded sublime being. But who is this skinny old monk? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to
Com to vote for me.
Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.